I am not Greg Parks. I am Wade Keller, and this is Wrestling Night in America. I don't think I've ever gotten to say that. Greg Parks retired from this gig last week. He is still part of pwtorch, doing a ton of stuff for us, but for a variety of reasons, had to bow out of Sunday nights. And I didn't want to skip a week. For people wondering about the show, we'll talk about this super quick, and then we're going to get to all-out discussion. The format right now, it looks like we're going to have a rotation of co-hosts for a while and doing different types of host arrangements with different co-hosts. So that's the brief thing. It's a work in progress. We actually had a host lined up that ended up having to fall through for a bunch of reasons I won't get into. So here I am, and I'm excited to talk AEW with our YouTube audience here. I am joined by Chris Lansdell from pwtorch and Eric Krol from pwtorch. Eric will be audio only with us as usual. Chris on camera. First of all, Chris, welcome to this special Wrestling Night in America All Out post-show discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, great to be here. I'm checking off another Torch bucket list item, getting to do a show with Eric. I just have Todd left, which is like
never going to happen. He's made that clear to me.
First Pokemon. Yeah, well, you know, I've taken Javier's place as the person he's avoiding, so I get it.
Yep. Eric, welcome. We haven't talked to you in a while, and I am excited to talk to you about All Out as we continue our discussion here.
Hey, Wade, you sicko. How you doing?
Good. I'm curious how long it's going to take to be irritated by you. It's going to be.
I think about 1 second there, right in the intro. So I'm ahead of my usual pace.
No, that it'll take more than that for you to irritate me.
This is great. This is like fantasy camp right here, like moderating for you two.
I love it. All right, so first of all, welcome to everybody who's joining us here, the regular Wrestling Night in America audience, and those of you who are just wanting to join us because we sent out word on Twitter and I forgot to post it on our website. I was rushing dinner and forgot to post on our website. So anyway, but welcome to everybody. We are talking All Out, which took place last night. I did a roundtable VIP exclusive podcast with Todd Martin and Javier Machado yesterday. We got close to 2 hours and had a spirited discussion about a lot of topics. I know, Chris, you are anxious to give your thoughts on last night's show, especially the main event. And so I want to go to you in just a second. I do want to note we are welcoming video callers, and we see the video caller waiting room filling up. So if you want to be on the show and you're a VIP member or Patreon supporter, that link is in my All Out report at pwtorchvip.com. So if you go there now, you can find it and be a video caller. And also on Patreon, I posted the link. So if you are listening to us and you are a VIP member or Patreon supporter, that's how you can join the show. Normally, I host late at night after Raw, Dynamite, and SmackDown. So we might hear from some different people who have earlier evening or normal hours that they consume YouTube content. So with that said, also, you can join us in the chat room, and you can also email us. And the email address, if you want to be part of the show that way, is wadekellerpodcast@gmail.com. Don't email Wrestling Night in America, the old email address that Greg had. I don't have access to that. And so if you did email that, go grab it and send it to me at wadekellerpodcast@gmail.com. And I think that covers the stuff that needs to be covered. So, Chris, you tell me what you are so anxious to talk about regarding last night's show.
Fair disclaimer, I'm coming at this from the perspective of an AEW fan. I mean, I cover New Japan for the Torch, but I watch AEW as well. And everything I'm saying right now is because I want this company to succeed and do better. Mm-hmm. That was the worst pay-per-view I've seen in many years. When you are writing a wrestling show from top to bottom, it needs to build. It needs to make sense. Match one needs to lead into match two and so on. And they can't take away from each other. You opened with a brawl that got bloody very early, which made sense in the context of the angle. But then you had a street fight that was going to get bloody. And then you had the main event with the lights out match that was guaranteed to get bloody. And then one of the most ridiculous angles I've seen in modern day wrestling right before the street fight. you ended up, instead of a show that gradually built to a climax of a feud that deserved a really big hardcore blow-off, what you ended up having was, oh, someone before me committed a felony, hold my rap sheet. And they just tried to take it further and further, to the point where we got attempted murder twice. It made no sense. We've gone beyond the sugar rush booking way that you're fond of mentioning. And we've got to the point now where they're just trying to shock us into watching. Mm-hmm. The arson on Dynamite was bad enough, and I was lucky enough to be on that post show. But the closer we got to the pay-per-view, the more I was like, you know what? We've seen similar stuff before in wrestling. And then Tony Khan actually said he was up all night trying to keep Hangman out of jail. And I thought, okay, they've made an effort here to get some continuity. And then it just got worse from there. Somehow, every match on this card elevated the nonsense.
All right, Eric, let me get your take on what Chris said and your overall thoughts on the show.
I mean, I guess AEW routinely does what Chris is talking about, right? They have almost never, that I can remember, done a pay-per-view where it builds, right? And it's common. I mean, it is not like how New Japan does its booking. It's not like how WWE does its booking of big shows. It's just not new to me. And I think why is it that way? And the answer is, I think, pretty simple. It's because everybody gets to book their own stuff in AEW, and no one has ever told no on anything, right? So if you were to do that, you would tell the Willow and Statlander, you can't do this, you can't do that, because we're going to have blood later in the show. And AEW just never does that. They have their matches, they let them go on, and I think it's for sure it's established fact that it's because everyone gets to book their own stuff. I would suspect it's because no one talks to each other as well.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, and Eric, I think it might be giving them. I don't think the phrase "giving them too much credit" is appropriate here, but I can't think of something else on the fly that's better. I don't know that it crosses their mind that that to do it, because I don't think it crosses their mind that it's a bad thing, like to pace the show. In a way where, I mean, it's a routine thing in companies. I mean, I've heard of it so much. I've reported on wrestlers being upset that they weren't able to be part of that they couldn't do things early in the card because, the main eventers who earn all the big money get to do all the cool stuff. And, when you have somebody at the top who goes, hey, as Chris said, we don't want to burn people out on certain things. Like there's certain finishes that if you see them done over and over again on the same show, it feels super contrived. But if you see it once, you think, oh, that might happen once. But when someone does it, all kinds of things, distraction finishes, whatever, the list of cliche type things that happen in wrestling matches, you need to have somebody overseeing this stuff and going, nope, later in the show, we're doing that spot and our main event guy's actually going to sell it. So no, you don't get to do that same crazy spot and no sell it and play to the crowd. And then, so I just don't think it's something yes, it's a lack of communication, but I think it's more a philosophical thing. And people can disagree on this stuff. There's no, absolute objective right answer to what should be on a wrestling show. All we can do is just discuss it, try to learn from history, use some common sense, gauge indications based on ratings, attendance, who's paying for it, pay-per-view buy rates. A little bit you can judge, social media, but there's pockets and bubbles of people who are fanatics and anti, pro WWE, pro AEW. We've seen so much of that. That's sometimes can be less than helpful. So Eric, I guess my thought is, do you think Tony's ever been on headset and said, "Oh shoot, we should have not had that done in this match because we're going to do it later"?
I would bet against that.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is a bug for Chris, right? He doesn't like this. For AEW, it's probably a feature, I would say. And it's a double-edged sword. It's why AEW has put on consistently great pay-per-view after great pay-per-view during their 5-year history, right? You don't just get 1 or 2 good matches. You might get 5 or 6, or like Full Gear, Wade, that I traveled up to the Twin Cities to attend with you. Yeah. Nearly every match on the show was great. Right.
Yeah.
the downside of it, having attended a bunch of AEW pay-per-views living in the Chicago area, is it can lead to some real big dead spots on the card. And that can range from one match, like I think Mercedes faced that yesterday. I think she faced it 2 weeks ago at All
We'll get to that
as well. Yeah. And so, or I've been at shows that have gone many hours, and there were like 2, 3, 4 matches. Like the middle of the card just died because the crowd can only be up for so long. It's just human nature. Unless you go get a bunch of cotton candy, if they're selling it at the concession stand, it's hard to stay up for 5 hours.
Yeah. Chris, back to you. Joining the convo or rejoin it.
think we don't have to worry too much about most of those finishes being reused because I have a severe needle phobia. Just by the way, the whole time when the COVID vaccines were first rolled out was a nightmare for me because every news story and every Facebook feed was people getting shots in their arms, and I can't even look at it. I had to turn my head, and I don't do that in wrestling shows. It's no secret I'm not a fan of the ultra hardcore stuff, but that's fine. I know some people are.
Right.
And if there's a feud that needed it, Swerve and Hangman needed it. I didn't have a problem with that match being violent. I was talking to a friend earlier. I forgot that Willow and Statlander used light tubes. Do you know how insane that is? Light tubes were used in a national promotion, and I forgot that they were on the show a couple of hours earlier because I had just watched a man attempted murder another man on a pay-per-view in front of probably about 1 million people.
Yeah.
That goes beyond necessary for a wrestling show. There's a certain amount of disbelief that we suspend, and we buy into that as wrestling fans. But I know they were paying homage to an angle from I think it was 85, was it? Was it 89 with Terry Funk and the plastic bag?
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that happened in the 80s that we really should not be bringing back. But what really upset me, and it actually literally upset me, was Wheeler Yuta being held back and the look on his face. And I never thought I'd be praising Wheeler Yuta's acting. This is where we find ourselves.
Yeah.
He looked genuinely distressed at what was happening in the ring. And it bothered the living daylights out of me. I mean, we all knew that the Mox turn was happening as soon as he came out. Like, that was telegraphed. But they could easily have done that angle without the bag spot, because then your main event, which by the way we've just built with a man setting fire to the other man's childhood home, now has to one up attempted murder.
So yeah, there's a lot of places to go here. I want to talk about the I'm choosing between 8 things I want to talk about, but let's talk about the plastic bag over the head. And by the way, I'm going to step back and say this because we talked about this on the roundtable last night too. There's different things that you can be in favor of or against on this show without being like, if you're against something on the show, you can be in favor of other things that people are against for it's not their thing or they think it's bad for business, all those kinds of things. Because there's aspects, and this goes into the main event also. Multiple things. Wrestlers putting themselves at great risk. And I would say slamming people spine first on cinder blocks has a chance to do more damage than the double table spot we saw in the women's off the stage going through 2 tables and a powerbomb. There's things that are more controlled, big surface area landing. It's been done hundreds of times. And then there's things that just you're going to end up with somebody, potentially getting seriously hurt. And I would put the cinder block thing in that category. Then you just also have the argument of none of the stuff is that bad. I can live with any of it, but there's too much of it and you get numb to it. And that can mean it should all be in the main event, or you could argue there's even too much of it in the main event. Like, come on, think of the things they kicked out of. That gets to the other point. You can think all those other things don't matter, but wrestlers shouldn't be kicking out of the number of things that they're kicking out of and sitting up and smiling. There's all kinds of things that you could just honestly think, I'm bothered by it. I'm nauseous. I'm uncomfortable. I'm not entertained. And I, like somebody on Twitter said, I paid to see Rocky and I got Saw. Yeah. And that's the way to put it. Now, you could also say buyer beware. It's AEW. They kind of told you, what to expect. But that's a person's perspective, and I thought that was a poignant way to put it. So the reason I say all this is I don't want someone to listen to this discussion. We're going to talk about good stuff on the show. I mean, Will Ospreay and Pac, my God. I mean, and like the women's hardcore match was exceeded my expectations, even if it's not my favorite style of match, and I might have a little bit of an issue here and there. Way exceeded my expectations. Congrats to them for setting out to do something and doing it as well as they did. So we're going to get to that stuff. But what I don't want is people to think when they're listening to us talk or join the conversation is we're making a broad generalization that every aspect of anything that we bring up, we're all equally against, and none of it can work. It's about each of those kind of categories should be judged on their own. Real risk to wrestler, stiff chair shot to the head, you gimmick the chair. Okay, huge. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but there's a huge noise. You've got the gross factor. Are we turning people off? You have the aspect that I haven't brought up, which is, are you jeopardizing your TV deal? Partnerships, advertisers. There's a risk of that. I mean, trust me, like it's happened in wrestling before, where it's content has caused deals to fall through or be put at risk. So I think everyone that we talk about, it needs to be put in its own section to be talked about. There's not one thing that anybody found right or wrong about the show that can be defended or criticized without taking into account that there's nuance and other things to it. So I don't want to belabor that point, but I think it needs to be said because this show has a lot of talking points and different people are going to have things that they are totally okay with, but then they're like, that thing got to me. By the way, you talk about needles, Chris. I like almost, it took me like 2 minutes to recover. And from the bloody snot hanging from Daddy Garcia's nose and the close up of that I was like almost gagging from that. So we all have our things. I just ate. I'm like, why did they have to zoom in on that? I could handle the needle more than I could handle this. Just sorry to be grabbed, but this string of snot, bloody. Don't want to talk about it anymore. So we all have our things. Or some of us don't have things. Good for you guys. So anyway, with that said, I want to go back to the suffocation angle because this is another aspect that I didn't bring up in that list of things. Kids imitating stuff. Kids could imitate that. If there is kids who are fans of pro wrestling, and it turns out in the next week or two, somebody kills their little brother with a plastic bag, it could destroy AEW. So you have to decide, is this worth it? WWE was so in trouble with this years ago. They ran PSAs for years saying, don't try this at home. We're professionals. It's a real thing. So you have to, that some of this comes down to, it's not morality police. It's not whatever the, trolls on the internet. Yeah. It's not what, exactly. It's not what, the internet people who are just, fanatically partisan are going to, do to try to make you seem like you're not a man if you don't just embrace ultra violence and want more. Some of it is just pragmatic. Is it worth it? Is there enough of an audience for that it's worth putting at risk? So that's another discussion point that, frankly, I think AEW should be cognizant of. They don't have a TV deal signed as far as we know. And it could bite them. So, Eric, a lot was said there. Jump in with anything you want to add to it, and then we're going to get to video callers here.
So we can start with the plastic bag spot. I was a teenager in 1989 when Funk did it to Flair on one of the Clash of the Champions. I don't remember which one, to set up an eventual I Quit match with Terry Funk. And I remember liking it back then because I was a dumb teenage boy.
You were never dumb, but you.
Yeah, I guess for liking it, I was probably dumb.
Okay, fair enough.
Last night was just too much for me as a guy who's in his early 50s. And I would note that AEW didn't show that on social media because they know it doesn't fly today. Yeah. And they wanted to avoid the exact things you were talking about, Wade, a kid imitating it. And so, it was on pay-per-view, not TV. I think if it was on TV, they would have had to get that cleared with their partners first.
I pointed that out on the VIP roundtable last night with Todd and Javier. It's like, I want to clarify. They put it on, past 11 p.m. Eastern on a Sunday night. You had to pay $60 for it. It's not a school night, but still, parents have a responsibility here. Knowing what AEW is, there is co-responsibility for it. But it doesn't mean, Eric, everyone's going to be as responsible as AEW when it comes to that clip. You know what I mean?
Sure, yeah. You can't prevent somebody from taking a screenshot of the video and then that it's around the world. And a kid sees it and a 5-year-old kid does it to his 2-year-old brother or sister because they don't have proper parental supervision. And cynically, the cynic in me that from years in journalism and watching wrestling, It's also possible they didn't show it on social media because they show everything on social media seconds after it happens, right? You almost don't have to pay for the pay-per-view because you can just follow it on social media. It's a way to make money and get buys for the people who didn't watch it live. They want to see what this plastic bag angle was all about. And if they're not going to show it on TV, that's interesting too, right? Because you would think, and in any video package building up a match between Danielson and Moxley, you'd want to be able to show that footage, and you probably can't, I wouldn't think. So, Danielson loves this stuff. Moxley clearly loves this stuff. In his book, he talked about how he idolized Terry Funk. Danielson loves playing dead or paralyzed. I think he's said in an interview, Cody Rhodes taught him how to lie, and it's great. And so,
He's such a
that's the plastic bag thing. I'll stop there. And what do you Wade talked about taking each spot individually. So plastic bag spot. Chris, what did you think?
I don't know where you go from there. You had these guys who were brought together by William Regal. That's a whole other story, but it seemed to work as a stable, despite the fact that we could never figure out if they were heel or face. The actual concept of the group together made sense. So it needed something quite shocking to break it up. Sure, I get that. Not only was the idea stupid, like there's nowhere to go from there. Like you have, if you're going to make this into a feud between Danielson and Yuta and presumably somebody else, and then this new Moxley faction, what's next? Like where do you go from there? We've had attempted murder. How do you escalate that? How do you get revenge for that? That was my issue with the arson angle. There's nowhere to go from there. You can't go further than that, but you'll also never be able to get revenge for that within the bounds of a wrestling angle. So there's the one problem with it. It's a disturbing image. Somebody getting hit with a chair is a one-time sharp shot, and then it's done. It's horrible to look at. It's a horrible, sickening sound. But the plastic bag is an ongoing struggle as you see the guy just draining. Just you can
flailing, desperately flailing to break free.
And then having the cutaways to Wheeler Yuta and Claudio. And then we're supposed to believe that literally nobody in the back thought, I should stop this. So none of it made sense. Absolutely none of it. I assume we're going to get some sort of motivation from Moxley on Wednesday. That could be a dangerous assumption. But there's just nothing about that angle made any sense, especially the timing of it, because then somebody had to top it.
That's the thing. You can't not do the world title match as well. You can. Honestly, they probably should have, but it was one of the two double main event, as Jim Ross said. So you do the world title main event, and you want to do the Moxley angle on pay-per-view because you can't do that on TV. I would argue you ought not do it on pay-per-view either. But if you're going to do it, pay-per-view is a better place than national basic cable. So then, I honestly, if I'm Hangman and Swerve, I mean, maybe they're okay with it, but I could imagine some wrestlers in their spot saying, "Hey, wait a second. Wait, we're up next, and you just got that is murder chant. You've taken away the draw. I mean, it's just, but yeah. Anyway, I mean, I just think it's like so self-evidently a bad idea to do those back to back, and that overrides whatever motivation there is to get Moxley over as a heel. And the thing is people, well, CCW does stuff like that, right? And they draw 200 people for a reason. They don't have a national cable deal, and they're not turning profits, and they're not paying wrestlers full-time livings. There are things absolutely you can do for a niche audience, and to each their own. Like if it's legal and they're adults who sign up for it. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying I'm not gonna. I mean, I might have an opinion on it, but I'm not gonna like try to get it like banned. It's adults doing what they want and adults paying to see it. That's their business. My argument, standing back and analyzing the industry from the perspective that I've done for 30 plus years, is, and Triple H and Stephanie co-opted this for me using it for a long time, by the way. Not that I was the only one to use it, but I feel like I can't use it anymore, which is what's best for business. I mean, I've said that for decades, and then they just turned that into a thing on TV that took some of the effectiveness away from it, because it feels like you're quoting them. But that's always been what's best for business. That's what you do if you're trying to be an objective analyst and approach things journalistically. I think last night's show was fraught with challenge, with potential Backlash. We have a lot of chat room comments. I've starred them. We'll get to them later. I put some on the screen, but we have a ton of people listen on the podcast, not on YouTube. So we'll get to those, and I'm keeping an eye on them. But I want to get to the first of our video callers. Again, if you're joining us in progress, our viewership is ticking up every few minutes here. If you're a VIP member or a Patreon supporter, pwtorch, the code to be a video caller, or you can block your camera like Krol did, has done, and just be an audio caller. Either way works. The link is there, and we're reserving it just for VIP members and Patreon supporters. It's in my All Out report at pwtorchvip.com. So just click on that. You'll see the code. Join us. You can also, if you can't find it, you can email me at wadekellerpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll send it to you if that's easier while the show's going on. I'll be checking email regularly, or like I said, on Patreon. Otherwise, email us, wadekellerpodcast@gmail.com, or join in the chat. Mitch is on hold as a video caller. Sometimes people get confused and click the video caller link just to listen, but it looks like Mitch is ready for us. So let's bring him on. Mitch, welcome. You are walking.
Hey, guys. Yeah, I didn't know it was actually about to get on. I did that.
Sorry about that. I didn't give you a warning.
But
we're good.
It's okay. Yeah, I only caught the back half of the show, and I didn't pre-think of my question, but I guess the two things I really didn't like. I agree with Chris. I didn't like the hypodermic needle spot, but probably for a different reason. I just thought it was dumb. I couldn't really see the needle. I didn't think it had the effect. I've gotten that shot before. I never had to go through my cheek, but like it didn't to me.
Yeah.
I thought it would have been better if you're going to go that hard to just have something in. None of this is safe. My wife's a nurse. She could probably tell me. But pretend like he was injecting him with something if you're going to go that route.
That's what I thought he was going to inject him with something. And maybe we're supposed to think he did. And so he would pass out and not be able to fight anymore. Like I was like, he's paralyzing him or poisoning him. And I don't know that ultimately is what the point was. It was just gross people out by sticking it through a cheek, which if that was all he was trying to do, it doesn't act. I mean, it might freak somebody out if Swerve is scared of needles, but it's not like going to stop someone from fighting. He was pulling staples out of his chest, so right. I thought the point was he's going to inject him in the arm or the neck or something. And the idea was he'd pass out, and that'd be a novel, I think, way to win an unsanctioned match. Mitch, back to you.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that he was going to poison him, and then he'd disappear for a while. And because the feud's been elevated to that, I think I'm in the minority here because I think Swerve and different promotion, but CM Punk are in the wrong because they started all this elevation. If you're going to threaten my child, then it's pretty much on site. Whatever happens from here on out, it's on you. So I had no problems with the elevation as much. Well, I don't think we should be trying to impale people with burned objects. And also, like the Saul comment's probably accurate. But if we're going to do the injection angle,
for that matter,
yeah, let's
you could go on. I'm okay with this, but we probably shouldn't do that, and we probably shouldn't do that, and we probably shouldn't do that. Like there's a long list of things from the show we could get to.
Unfortunately, when I found out the cinder block was real, I was like, I don't think we need to do that. But my point. I mean, it was too. I can watch a horror movie and be fine. It was too much for me, and I was at SummerSlam and I was at the GCW show, and you can't see that stuff. So this is another problem. You're in the audience.
Oh, interesting.
You're not catching any of that stuff. You don't see the scratches unless you're watching the screen. But if you're paying X amount of dollars for a ticket, you're probably not doing that. So then you're getting this weird reaction from the crowd. You're definitely not seeing a hypodermic needle. So from a live crowd perspective, I hate when they do that kind of stuff where it's like, oh, well, if I was watching this on TV, I'd see this better, but I'm paying all this money to be here and this is not for me. So it's something I thought of when I'm trying to squint to see. I don't have the best eyes. I'm trying to see a hypodermic needle through somebody's cheek. But I thought it was a bit much for the second biggest promotion. That's my 2 cents.
So, Mitch, did you think from other things that we're talking about, if you're able to hear us, was there anything where you're like, I think I was fine with it, but it is bad for business, or other things that you think were actually bad for your enjoyment of the show? And it's not meant to be a leading question. I'm just like, for example, because we had a suffocation angle, it took away some of the punch that the main event had, or because the women had the brawl with the lights and the power bomb off the stage, I kind of got numb to it in the main event. Or are you of the opinion, and I've heard it, and I understand people a good number of people feel this way, more's better. I don't get numb to that. I love this stuff. Bring it on.
So I had a weird experience with the suffocation angle because I went to get something and came back to Brian Danston being suffocated and just somebody with a plastic bag over their head. And thankfully, my 6-year-old wasn't in the room.
Yeah.
I don't look at a show that it's just for me. So I'm not watching this going, can I personally handle, because I can handle that stuff. There's nothing on the show that I can't handle. But if I want a company to be successful, you don't make a show just for me. So you make a show best. I think the suffocate, like I can tell you this, my oldest, who's 19, and my wife saw the blood on Danny Garcia's face. And they're like, can you turn this off so we can eat?
Yep.
So it's just, and they're about as casual as it gets as far as wrestling goes. There's just, my niece is a huge 16 WWE fan. And we watched the blood and guts match, and she said, Uncle Mitch, can you please turn this off? It's too real. Yeah. There's a whole audience that's not entertained by impaling with burnt wood, hypodermic needles. It's turning, everyone I know who's a casual viewer does not like that stuff. And they also don't like horror movies. But it's, I think it's too much.
Yeah.
That I might not have answered your question. Oh, for me personally, it was the I thought the cinder block was egregious because you don't need a real cinder block out of everything. That is, you could legitimately cripple somebody if a spot goes wrong.
Yeah. If it goes right.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean,
you're right.
How do you drop someone from several feet above who weighs as much as wrestlers do onto the edge of a cinder block and be like, well, that's the safe way to do it. If something went wrong, oh boy.
Yeah. I'm not a wrestler, but I have friends who are.
Yeah.
They've told me there's no safe way to do that. And I mean, broken backs. And I mean, I was thinking when Hangman got dropped and he scratched his back, I'm like, how many inches was that until he potentially gets hurt? And the whole angle is this guy's got a family that this other guy threatened. And we're potentially going to hurt this guy seriously or cripple him, and nobody wants to see that when you go to a show. It's like going to a football game. You don't see somebody get hurt. So I just think it's too much. And I don't think, and talking to people who've worked in AEW, I don't think Tony has a good grasp. I remember Chris Jericho saying this years ago. I went to the original Double or Nothing, and he made a comment about the his finisher. And he said, I asked the Young Bucks to stop doing their spinning elbow, because if they do that early in the show, it's going to take away from the main event whenever I try to land my finisher in the main event. Yep. And, I don't feel like the company has those same values. I'll just say that. And look, y'all, I was at All In and the first Double or Nothing show. So, like, I'm someone who really wants the company to be successful.
Yep.
But I just, there's no consistency.
There are things like that I'll criticize about AEW, and then there'll be people like, don't you want them to succeed? How dare you? You're a hater. And I'm like, if you knew the people in that company, on-air people and off-air people who I talk to, who are saying the same thing, sparking some thoughts I have that I didn't even have, that they're like, hey, did you think about this? Or cheering me on, who want the company to succeed, and they're as frustrated as anybody. They're frustrated with Tony. They're frustrated. So my point is there's people in that company who want changes to be made, as you say, Mitch, for the good of the company, because you want to see it succeed. So this idea that you don't it's like, there's all kinds of analogies. You're not being loyal to the brand that you want to see succeed by never criticizing them. That's being an enabler. And that has led to a lot of demises of companies over the years, to a fan base that were too reflexively defensive of bad business decisions because they felt it was their duty to be loyal.
Yeah, our pastor says, if I'm not helping you be successful, I'm helping you be a failure, something to that extent. Yeah. And I feel like this applies with that statement of it's not a critique in a negative way. It's not I don't like. It's like you correct it.
There's no malice.
An employee or a child.
Yeah.
It's not I don't love AEW. I don't like a company. It's success. And I'm weird. I get everybody to watch wrestling. I got people from my church going to a local wrestling show next Saturday. I'm the dude who's like, we should all just go check it. I'm the guy who brings people in. They don't want to see this. No one's like, oh yeah, I want to go see light tubes. And I went to GCW, which ended up being not that hardcore, because I know what I'm getting into. My buddy knew what he was getting into. I don't want to bring my 16-year-old niece. We go to WWE or local, even the local shows don't get this violent. But I think it's savable, for all the negatives. The wrestling was great. I enjoy a lot of the angles. I don't watch every week anymore, just don't have time, but I still can jump in and jump out and figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And
those video packages were nice, weren't they, Mitch? Before each of the matches.
Very nice. Everything I needed to know.
They primed you, they prepped you, they reminded you, they caught you up. Yeah. They didn't label the point.
Poke at Eric's picture on the screen like I say that way. It's just I can hear the torment.
Yes.
Luckily, I didn't watch most of the show live besides the last 2 matches, so I was able to fast forward through those video packages.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Eric.
I did not. Yeah. I was enjoying them to get caught up on. And here's the thing: wrestling should be that good. Wrestling should have a good story, but that if I need to catch up in 5 minutes, I can do it. It's part of the fun of the product.
And there are people who don't watch the weekly show. They just tune in for the PLEs and pay-per-views. And those video packs. I mean, they know that there are those people out there, and you might as well cater to them. The hardcore ardent followers are not going to not watch a show because there's a 30-second recap of highlights of a match. Nor do I think it's negative for people who have watched every hour of the show. I watch every hour, and I see highlights. I'm like, oh man, I'd forgotten about how well that was shot, and that promo, that was a key line. I mean, it's just I don't have like a photographic perfect memory for all this stuff, and I think it gets you in the mood. It gets you reinvested in things.
It can remind you of something before when things are going where they should.
Yeah. All right, cool. Mitch, thank you. Anything else you want to say before we move on? Oh, you muted yourself, I think.
That's it. No, I've said enough. I appreciate it. No,
Thanks,
can you hear me? Oh, sorry, I got a phone call. Thank you all.
Oh, that's right. Yep. Take care. Yep. All right. Talk to you later. Okay. I was going to say, as far as the cinder block goes, because Mitch brought that up, a wrestler been on multiple promotions and national television for years, is messaging back and forth with him. And he said, the cinder block stuff is stupid. At some point, Tony Khan's going to have a tragedy on a show. So, just in terms of a wrestler perspective, it's potentially tragic. I mean, it absolutely could be. And then you have to, but it can, and again, it can, I sometimes I message wrestlers, I'm like, oh my God, that looked like something could have gone wrong. And I've had wrestlers just go, relax. We know what we're doing. We're professionals. It's, there's things that look scary and dangerous that really aren't. They're, 1,000 out of 1,000 times we're going to be fine. Maybe 1 out of 10,000 times something will go wrong. Fair enough. I mean, I respect that and I take that into account. But the cinder block, geez. All right. Let's go to another video caller, Azan, and then we're going to bring Stephanie Chasen, who was in the building for the show as a media member on site, including at the weird media scrum, by the way. Stay tuned for details on that. But Azan, you just stepped away from your screen. There you are. Just now, I guess you're getting ready. So let's bring Azan in. We'll spend a couple minutes with him and then bring Stephanie in. Azan, thanks for holding. What are your thoughts on our discussion here and All Out last night? Good to see you.
I'm a little biased towards the discussion. I feel like it's good talking about the violence and stuff, but I'm a fan of old school Memphis wrestling. And I seen Jerry Lawler throw fire. I seen Eddie Gilbert threaten to kill Jerry Lawler on television, even hitting him with a car.
Yeah, that was a big deal.
Terry Gordy using cinder blocks. I feel like there's a difference in style over substance. So I'm like, what's your opinion on that? First off,
so I'll make my broad statement, because sometimes when something that I think is dumb to do is done and I criticize it, the weakest comeback is, well, it's been done before, so therefore it should be grandfathered in as a great idea. And it's like, no, if something like, I've covered this business for 35 plus years. If something dumb is done over and over again or just one other time, and I was critical of it, I don't now have to be okay with it because wrestling survived it happening, in whether it did damage or not. So the car angle was that was a big. I remember when that happened. I mean, it was a big deal in late '80s. I can't remember the exact year.
1990 to be exact.
Oh, was it? Okay, 1990. So very late '80s then. No, I'm kidding. And 1990 is the latest of the '80s. So that was a controversial thing that happened at the time, no question. And we've seen that. Like, this isn't a new thing with AEW. I mean, people are, golf carts and sort of half comedy spots. We've seen vehicles charge at people. Then was it Sammy Guevara who drove? I don't know. Yeah. So this is not. It's not. So part of it is each situation, I think, should just be judged on its own merits. A cinder block spot where you're dropping someone's spine over the edge of it at full force, and it happened to each wrestler. To me, that's not like, oh, I'm grossed out by that. I just am scared for the wrestler's safety. So it takes me out of the immersion. It's like if suddenly you're watching a Cirque du Soleil show in Vegas and there's nets, and then they take the nets away and they add I didn't prepare an analogy, but someone with a big pair of scissors starting to snip all the safety wires. You're like, okay, this looks like something bad is I don't know. That's a bad analogy, but you want to enjoy risk without it seeming like you're now paying to see a geek show where somebody could actually get seriously hurt beyond the normal inherent risk that is there. And so for me, the cinder block wasn't as gross as the snot coming out of Danny Garcia's nose that they gave us a high def 4K close up of. It just felt overtly dangerous, and I felt sort of dirty for being part of a group saying, yes, entertain me by risking paralysis. Like the art form of wrestling, you should entertain people by making it look like it's dangerous, but it's not really dangerous. And for me, and the wrestler I just cited, and it common sense, that was legitimately risky. So that's my thought. Eric, what do you think about what Zahn brought up?
So I think Hangman and Swerve wanted to show you stuff you hadn't seen probably
right. No
before,
question. Yeah.
in addition to some of the callbacks they did to their earlier matches. And I think for me, the match where Hangman drank Swerve's blood was probably the pinnacle of this feud for me in terms of it was the best match of the 3 or 4 that they did. So you're getting the hypodermic needle, the non-gimmick cinder block when Swerve had previously used gimmick cinder blocks. I would guess they've probably done one or both in GCW. I don't watch that promotion, but it strikes me that a hypodermic needle wasn't a new thing in wrestling. You could see it in maybe Big Japan or GCW. But the cinder block spots risk paralysis. I guess for me, that you don't want anybody paralyzed. The thing that put it over the top for me was the finish. The unprotected chair shot just has no place in wrestling in 2024. Yeah. We know too much about concussions in the human brain. I don't care if the chair was gimmicked, shaved down or of a different material or whatever they would do to gimmick such a chair. Dementia is no laughing matter. I have 2 relatives who have it or have had it. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Losing your memory. It's just devastating. A group of, I did not go live to the event. I was traveling this weekend, but a group of Chicago wrestling friends that I usually go with went. One of them walked out during the main event. He was so disgusted.
Wow. So. I will say we put up a Twitter poll initially, and it was in the first 50 to 100 votes, which is generally the point at which the numbers don't change much for the next few days. When a poll is up, you get a pretty good initial sample. It was close to 2/3 who were saying it went too far, and about 1/3 said it didn't bother them. And then when we got to 400 votes, it evened out. And I was like, let me screen capture this. Something's going on. And then it just like 95% of the votes were the violence didn't bother me at all. It turned out there were some fanatical AEW, not Reddit, Discord and Twitter accounts that just said flood this poll. But the initial response, you talk about a friend walking out. I mean, that's a risk that we talk about. Like we can sit here and say, well, it didn't bother me, and the wrestlers know what they're doing, and you can make all these subjective arguments. And most of what we're doing here is subjective, personal opinion. But if it's turning more people away than you're gaining, I mean, that's sort of objectively bad for business. And the initial response on the Twitter poll, when it truly was just a random sampling of people who happened to follow us on Twitter at pwtorch, it seemed like the majority were against it. And then it got, skewed, which is fine. I mean, whatever. People should go vote their conscience, go vote their enthusiastically. I don't hold it against them for doing that. But the initial numbers, I think, are probably more respective of a more random Twitter sample than what happened when people were sent there from the AEW Fanatic sites. And I think that is possibly, if that's happening, Eric, with a friend of yours, it could be something Tony Khan is hearing about. Also, you wonder if there isn't a network executive who has a niece or nephew or brother or whatever who said, what is going on here? You guys are proud to put this brand on your corporate, portfolio. And do you know what, do you know what they're doing? And I mean, I'm not even making a judgment whether it's fair or unfair. It's on pay-per-view. It's not on your network, whatever, but it could backfire. That's just a reality. And it has before.
Yeah, I don't know
has
that
back then.
last night's going to do that, and I think all of this is anecdotal, and we'll see how it affects business. It could spur. What are they lacking? They're lacking males 18 to 35. I think is the demo that's 18 to 34 that's gone down for them. I mean, a lot of the demos and the overall viewership have gone down for them since their high point a few years ago. But and I think it's acute 18 to 34 males. That's the kind of stuff that they would be more inclined to like than the rest of the audience, I would imagine.
So it's the idea, Eric, that they're like Tony is like, we need to get these people back, so we're going to try to hyper appeal to them.
No, truthfully, the bag angle and what happened in the main event, they were both polarizing. They were both pro wrestling as opposed to sports entertainment, right? But more than anything, I think these were spots booked by the talent themselves, right? And so TK isn't coming up with these ideas, right? But it's the wrestlers. But at the end of the day, Tony Khan just doesn't say no, or he doesn't say no often enough, or he doesn't say no to the right stuff. I mean, look at what both Hardys did in AEW. Matt Hardy, when he went kerplunk in one of the pandemic era football stadium events, and then they continue the match. I think I can't remember who his opponent was, Darby or Sammy Guevara. Jeff Hardy jumping off of all sorts of places in the arena in that one match where he went through a couple tables. So I don't know that's a calculated business decision by Tony to do this. It's individual talent doing what they want to do. Maybe it's a side effect of that.
Yeah. I'm less confident than you, but I'm not saying the odds are high that this show won't do it. I mean, there's things that happen over and over again and don't get attention. And then suddenly they get attention, and then you have consequences for not only this time, but all the other times you did it. And maybe Tony Khan's confident. He might have cleared this with executives ahead of time, and his advertising partners and his future whatever partners. But there's, the plastic bag over the head suffocation angle with a guy, passing out and being carried away with an oxygen mask with medics frantically acting like they're trying to save his life is something new for AEW. And it's been a long time since we've seen that on national TV. Azan, back to you. You are our video caller. You can respond to that or add something new.
I want to talk about the Will Ospreay last night. With him,
yes.
I like that match with him and Pop, but the interaction with him and Ricochet is the most realistic thing I've seen in AEW in a while. Because I feel like Ricochet, like, why you calling me out like this? Like, real frustration come out of Ricochet. I never seen that in WWE. What do you think about that? And like the idea, Will Ospreay want Ricochet to prove himself, not get a golden ticket like everybody else who comes from WWE.
Yeah, so I thought Ricochet was, trying to show he could act in a different way than he did in WWE. Be a little bit more, in your face. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how to describe, but it felt like he was trying to establish a little more kind of alpha male approach. I thought it, to me, and I haven't rewatched the segment. Todd last night on the VIP Roundtable thought it made sense. I thought it was a little bit of an overreaction on Ricochet's part for what Ospreay was doing, but I also thought Ospreay was kind of weird. Like, I saw you watching my match, and Ricochet's like, you're talking shit about me, and it's like, both of you settle down. Like, that's not enough to like break up a friendship or cool off a friendship. But I haven't rewatched it yet, so maybe ultimately it makes sense. But it felt like they were being a little overly snippy with each other. Chris, what do you think?
I'm interested to see where it goes. I like Ospreay almost trying to force himself into an on-screen locker room leader, because God knows the locker room needs one right now. And calling out Ricochet in a work shoot, brother, might actually be the best way to do it, because Ricochet seemed like he was coasting on his athletic ability for a long time. We've all seen the match with those two. If you can call it a match. It was spectacular, but I don't know that I would call it wrestling, but we're not relitigating that. That's years ago. In order to get to that match again, and in order to do it again with both wrestlers being in such a different place, I think it needs some meat to it. It needs a reason for it to happen and not just be, hey, let's go out there and dance for 15 minutes again. And this is a really good way to do that. It's not about face and heel. It's not about a friendship cooling off. Ultimately, I think it's just going to be, I'm going to show you that I'm worthy of your respect. And it's going to be two rivals facing off and trying to prove who's better, which is about the only way you can get a face versus face matchup with some storyline that doesn't feel like a cop-out.
Anything else, Azan, you want to bring up?
I'm getting tired of Mercedes matches. I don't know, like this is the second one. Like I fell asleep at all, and I fell asleep at all during her matches. It's like I don't know. It's like I don't know why they're boring. It's like she's more exciting than she has been. Like the Willow match was good. The Stephanie match was good. It's like maybe she need like not wrestling top names in AEW. Maybe start a little bit lower and work her way up with these title matches because it's like all bringing these top stars are not like bringing no excitement actually during the match. What do you think on that?
Yeah, thanks, Azan. That was a down period in the show. There wasn't great chemistry with Sheeta and Mercedes. Eric, what do you think of that match? And broadly speaking, is there a Mercedes problem that AEW needs to address and try to augment how they're featuring her?
I guess I can't remember what she was pretty late in the card a couple weeks ago at All In. I can't remember who she followed, but I feel like match placement was an issue.
Yeah,
and here she was third from the top, but she came after a bunch of good matches, right? And there is, as previously said, if you're there live, there's always a time in a long AEW show where you get tired, and she seems to have been the victim of that. That said, I mean, the Britt match wasn't very good, and the Sheeta match wasn't great either. It was okay. And I think in the past, Sasha Banks was one of the best women workers in the world, if I'm not mistaken. So is it that she's not wrestling enough matches, so she's a little rusty? Is it the opponents? Is it where they're placing her on the card? And I get why she's placed near the top of the card because they're trying to justify the salary, right? And treat her like a draw, whether she is or not. So I think simplifying the finisher, I'm sure that's a common refrain, is this finisher's not working. She didn't execute it well in New Japan or Stardom, and she's not executing it well in AEW. So just go to something else. It doesn't have to be new, or figure out a different move that she can execute, or that the other wrestlers can execute and take.
Derek Hubbard in the chat says, to me, Mercedes has been exposed. Without WWE shine, she's not a great character. Without good opponents and great stories, she's only an above average wrestler. Chris, what do you think?
If you can't have a good match with Hikaru Shida, you're not a good wrestler. Hikaru is one of the best performers, regardless of gender, in the industry. And if you can't get a good match with her, you're not doing well. Britt had a good match with Shida. So what is Mercedes missing? I don't think it's a lack of skill on her part. I think it's a little bit of everything that Eric just mentioned. She's a little bit ring rust. She's a little bit getting exposed, like Derek said. But I think the majority of it, from what I see, is she hasn't got herself out of the WWE style fully yet. When she was in Japan with a Japanese ring and a Japanese setting, it was easier to immerse herself in that style. Now she's back in North America, same ring dimensions as in WWE. The tightness of the ropes is going to be the same. The audience is going to be the same. It feels like WWE, but she doesn't have the ability to stand out that she had there because everybody is at or above her level. So she's not bringing people up to her. She has to bring herself up to them, and she can't.
All right, Azan. Anything else you want to add before we get to Stephanie Chase, who's standing by?
With the BC breakup, what do you think about the Darby Allin thing? Why do you feel that's going to play in with the whole Bryan Danielson wheel of you? Why do you think how is that going to play? Because Moxley's been very intimate. I want to speak to Darby Allin for the past 2 weeks now. How do you feel that's going to play into it?
Yeah, there was a threatening tone to Moxie going, I want to talk with you. Don't make this difficult, whatever the exact wording was. Kind of in different speculation. Nobody thinks Darby's going to turn heel and join Moxley. So is the intent to pitch Darby to join him or what? Chris, what do you think?
Darby's Rey Mysterio. He will not be heel ever. He's too popular and he's too good at playing the underdog face. To be honest, that actually didn't occur to me at all. The thing I was wondering is, can we finally get rid of the trios titles now that team is almost definitely split up? Mm-hmm. But yeah, the Darby Allin thing, you've got to imagine he's going to go into that title match because that's coming up. That's at Grand Slam, right? Yeah. You've got to imagine he's going to go into that with an offer on the table from Moxley. If you can call it an offer, it'll be a mafia-style offer. Mm-hmm. And wanting to respect Danielson and respect the business and go in there as himself. And I think that'll be the angle for that match. I'd put the odds at 15% of Darby walking out with the championship, and that's higher than it was before last night.
All right. Very good. Azan, appreciate the call. Good topics.
All right, thank you.
You bet. We'll keep an eye on you in the chat in case you continue on in there. Okay, I'm excited to bring Stephanie Chase into the conversation now. Stephanie, thank you for holding and listening in on the conversation. You welcome, first of all. Good to see you again.
Hi, Wade. Very cool to be on here when you're with Eric. You two are my favorite podcasting tag team. And hello to Chris as well.
Oh, yeah, I'm the as well, yeah.
I'm sorry, Chris.
That's all good. It's all good.
I hate trios. What can I say? I'm joking.
When my thing about Chris about it's all good, it means it's not all good. That's the thing with me. Yeah, so I'm just saying, in my world, there's some tension here. Although you were very excited to be on with Eric and me too. So, at the top of the show, Chris was like, "This is awesome. This is a bucket list item. I'm on with Eric and Wade." Or with Eric.
I heard that and I was like, "Yeah, I feel that too.
Yeah, cool. So, Stephanie, you attended. You were part of the media section. You watched it in the arena. You were there live to watch the matches. Yep. And then you're at the media scrum afterwards. So. I have questions for you, but I don't want to only have you answer questions that Chris and Eric and I ask. You also can bring up key things we might not think to ask. But one thing that I noticed, and I think that I'm really curious to get an in-person response from you on, is the main event. There was a chant of cowboy shit for Hangman Page, who was in theory a heel for burning down Swerve's home. Everything they did about the angle with Swerve crying and sobbing and stapling his family's photos to Hangman's face. Swerve was meant to be the sympathetic figure based on how this was framed and presented, and the match led to a cowboy shit chant. So you can also say, well, there's going to be every AEW crowd, especially in Chicago, you're going to have people cheering both people. So, but it seemed to go a little bit against the story they were trying to tell, the way that they were telling it. And then number two, I didn't sense when the match was over that I wasn't sure what the mood was in the arena for what the crowd had just watched. Were the wrestlers expecting a standing ovation or I don't know what the wrestlers are going for, and I'm curious what wrestlers in AEW were going for and what the mood was and the vibe, to use that overused word, was in the building when the match concluded and the show was over.
So yeah, the crowd chanting cowboy shit, I think that's what you're gonna get when you do this kind of extreme violence that we saw, because a lot of people are just gonna think it's so cool that they end up cheering for the person that they maybe shouldn't be cheering for. And I think like a lot of the time Swerve was definitely the fan favorite until you got to that point.
Stephanie's screen froze and then she dropped off. I'm going to give her a second. So actually, as we wait for her to re-chime in, I did not do that, by the way. I'm completely innocent and not push a button and bump her. Although I was very upset by what she was saying. I was very tempted to hit the eject button. Chris, what did you think of the crowd reaction during the match and after the match? I haven't watched it back since last night, but it struck me as it felt like the crowd was sort of numb and in shock and maybe exhausted or not sure what they watched. But I don't want to project onto it just based on that. What were you thinking?
I want to point out how ridiculous it is that we're sitting here and we have to say that he is hypothetically the heel for burning down somebody's house. That, first of all, is alarm bells. I think the crowd just rebelled, honestly. I think once they got the "This is murder" chant, they were done and nothing was being taken seriously after that point. Yeah. You can look at this in a way as Hangman got revenge for what is undoubtedly Swerve firing the first too far bullet and going into his house and standing over his child's crib. So maybe that's the angle they were going with. I'm hoping Stephanie can shed some light, because I'm sure she was among those chanting for Hangman, obviously, just clearly, right? Because he's anti-trios, we know this. But I don't know what else it could be. Like, I feel like it was just a case of they'd had enough and they were rebelling.
So to our podcast audience listening after the fact, Stephanie is back with us. So let's
I'm
throw
so
back.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, you get 2 strikes and that's 1. Otherwise, you're never welcome back. No, go ahead, Stephanie. Technology happens.
I think the general vibe of the crowd watching the match was the shock of how things were escalating, you know, the cinder blocks coming out. I think no one thought they would be used, let alone more than once. And then we had what Hangman did with the needles. So I think that the levels that Hangman took it to made people suddenly start cheering him when they really shouldn't have been. But at the same time, Hangman is, like I always say, he's the main character of AEW. Like, he's like the original baby face that these fans, you know, followed. They watched him lose to Jericho to become the first champion. Then they followed his journey till he won the title off Kenny. So he's a really hard guy to make people cheer against. And they did a really good job to make people turn against him in this feud with Swerve. But I think that, I mean, that visual at the end of Dynamite, it was cool. Hangman sitting in front of a burning house and drinking. And
That's
then
badass,
you
right?
have, it's totally badass. And then you have everything that happened in the match. And I think people were just like, you know, we all know it's not real. So we all don't actually hate Hangman. But when you then see him do things that are cool to the audience, then you're going to be more inclined to cheer him. But the general vibe of people watching the match, like even just in the media section that I was in, and we actually got like really good seats for the first time. We were like the front of the 100 section, so just after the floor. So we got a pretty close-up view of everything that was happening, and there was a lot of like gasps and screams and like shock at just what we were seeing. And you know, I've listened to the whole show, and I personally like really liked everything that went on, but I do get all the criticisms as well. It was one heck of a match to experience live. Like, I never thought I'd experience a match live where I saw someone take out a needle at the end. That's not what I was expecting at all. But the general vibe of the crowd was definitely a lot of shock, probably both in a good and bad way.
Yeah. So as you talked about the crowd being numb, do you think the plastic bag suffocation spot worked against Swerve and Hangman being able to effectively shock the fans with what they were doing, or not really? Because I mean, the women's match was hardcore, and it's not just brawling outside the ring and weapons and tables breaking. There's a lot of just big violent spots within the confines of the ropes that are regular wrestling moves too. So did the suffocation, do you think that was placed in a way that worked against the match, or is it just part of 4+ hours of wrestlers in various ways being violent against each other?
Well, they did a great trick during the women's match in that when Sheeta and Willow were fighting on the stage and Willow used the light tubes, that's when these screens in the arena went off. So none of us like could actually see that unless you were right in front of it. So we didn't get to experience like that hardcore bit of the women's match. I think when I was listening to what you were saying before with the criticisms, the ones that I agree with are Tony letting wrestlers do what they want and repeating too many things, and the plastic bag angle going on right before Swerve Hangman seemed to me like a bizarre decision, because that was another visual that was so unforgettable and like genuinely scary. Even though I liked it, it was very uncomfortable to watch. And then when it was over, you're thinking, oh, okay, but the next match had been kind of hyped to us as the most violent thing that we're going to see, and now we've just seen someone be suffocated with a plastic bag. That is not something that you are seeing, you know, regularly on television. You could almost think when Hangman and Swerve are fighting, well, one of them should have just bought a plastic bag, because we've just seen what that can do.
Yeah, really.
You know, and that's a big problem with Tony Khan's booking, that there's even small things in matches that are repeated, or he'll do an angle on Dynamite and then the next angle will have something similar in it. And then you get to something like this, and it felt like for the beginning of Swerve Hangman that it wasn't really like living up to what we thought it was going to be, but then they had to keep escalating it. And then we got to the needle spot. But as far as the plastic bag thing, I just wanted to say on the subject of Tony kind of letting wrestlers do whatever they want. That angle, obviously something has been done before with Terry Funk. And I just think it's interesting that I've seen that Eddie Kingston has said that he has pitched that many times and been told like, no, that Tony didn't want to do a plastic bag angle. And now he's let Moxley do it, which just seems very Tony, because Moxley seems to be in a weird position of being in his own little universe of getting to do what he wants right now, because he may not have been enjoying what he was doing before. So it doesn't surprise me that Tony maybe caved to something that Moxley wanted to do when he's previously said no to it.
I'll give Tony possible credit in this too, which he might think, Eddie, you're great, I love you, but if we're going to do that spot, we're going to save it for when someone who's wildly popular and one of our top paid people in a main event world title position wants to do it to try to get fans to turn against him by doing it to our top babyface who's a current world champion. Like, you could imagine him saying, we can do it, but we can't do it on a mid-card match. We can't do it on a Rampage. We can't do it on a pre-show. It's got to be something we save, because there's no topping that. Hypodermic needle or not, or whatever. I mean, like, there's no topping suffocating someone with a plastic bag and they're gasping for air and they're taken out on an oxygen. So maybe it wasn't something philosophically Tony was against as much as I want to save it for when it's really going to count. And I would give credit to him for that, actually, Stephanie, if that was his argument against Kingston. Not I'm philosophically against it, but on this occasion, let's actually save it. You also mentioned, and the Shermanator pointed this out, the only thing overused on the show were wrestlers getting their knees up on dives, especially considering it was a finish early on. I noticed that too with the match, and I these things jump out to me when I watch wrestling shows, and ever since it was pointed out to me decades ago that it's something you don't want to do. And I tell the story all the time. I was shadowing Paul Heyman when he was booking a Windy City Wrestling show circa 1990 at the old Eric. What was the building? The near the Slaughterhouse, the International Amphitheater. And Paul let me shadow. I've shot photos at ringside, but between every match, I went backstage, and Paul told me what he was doing, why he was doing it, what he let wrestlers do, what he said not to do, why he did the finish, what he was thinking based on the crowd response to that match, and how that was changing his mind. He just wanted to share with me a night in the life of a booker at a live event. And then since then, it's just been something that's fascinated me, like the kind of the idea of, and different bookers have different philosophies, but if we do something in one match, don't do it in another. And something as simple as lifting your knees on a splash, like, how does that happen over and over? Like, are wrestlers watching and they go, that's a good idea, let's do it? Or are they independently coming up with it? Or is an agent on the same match or multiple matches suggesting the same thing? But there should be quality control. I mean, some of the stuff, that's not a big deal, but it's better if it doesn't look like you're just repeating stuff over and over in matches. Unless it's a storyline, like this referee's incompetent, they keep doing the same thing wrong, we're going to fire him or something like that. Chris, do you want to chime in? You can respond to that, but also ask Stephanie a question about her experience at the building too.
I do want to chime in real quick. One of my other side hustles, I produce variety and burlesque shows. And when you're doing that, you need to make sure that everybody's number doesn't look too much like the rest on the show. Mm-hmm. You don't want every single person doing the same teases, the same moves, and heaven forbid, the same music. But you can always tell when a performer has watched the rest of the show, because they might change their choreography up slightly so it doesn't look too much like the 2 or 3 numbers before them. I don't get the sense that anyone backstage is watching anything that anyone else is doing.
Yeah.
They're just going out there. Like, apron spots used to be a rarity. And yes. I make fun of it.
Years ago they were.
Yeah. In my written reports all the time, I make fun of it being the hardest part of the ring trademark, because that's just such an overused term now. There's no cohesion between within the card, and that's what I said right at the top, where you build the story match by match. They don't. Not only do they not do that, they don't pay any attention to what anyone else is doing, which I don't get that.
Yeah.
One thing I would love to know, Stephanie, a lot of the great wrestling on this show is being forgotten and overshadowed by the nonsense in the last 2 matches.
That's our fault, Chris.
It is definitely our fault entirely. I actually gave Moxley the plastic bag. Was the crowd as into the Fatal 4-Way and the Ospreay Pac match as it seemed? And by the end of the night, were they still talking about that, or had it been completely forgotten?
Well, so for me, the best live experience of watching any of the matches on the card was Pac and Ospreay. I thought the crowd were so up for that. And everyone around me was so into it. So for me, that was the match of the night that didn't include any shenanigans. Like, that was the actual match of the night. And I did think to myself, when it was all said and done, and a couple of hours later when I was in my hotel room, I thought, oh yeah, Pac and Ospreay had a really great match. Because even I forgot about it because of everything else I'd seen, and like everything else was kind of the talking point. But the crowd were definitely so into that match. I don't know how it came across on TV, but they absolutely loved it. They were into the 4-Way as well, but not as much. And I think that one is definitely not as memorable as the Ospreay and Pac match. And the other match that I kind of ended up forgetting about was even MJF and Daniel Garcia, because they went on first. And I was really looking forward to that match, and I'm really into Daniel Garcia. And then I found myself quite a while afterwards thinking, oh yeah, I haven't really thought about what went on with Max and Daniel Garcia, because not just because it was the first match, but because we had so much stuff afterwards that was like more memorable, even though Daniel Garcia did like quite the beatdown on MJF that maybe on any other show where there hadn't been suffocation or needles, we would have thought, wow, look what Daniel Garcia did to MJF.
So much of what I preach about, I want to pick the right word so it doesn't seem too personal. The things that I criticize AEW for is inefficiencies, not getting the most bang for your buck. There are wrestlers, if wrestlers are going to take physical risks, injuries are going to happen, their bodies are going to take a beating. That comes with the territory. But when they do, willingly, for money, for approval, for acclaim, when they do it, respect that effort enough to make sure we don't forget about it by the end of the night. There are regular wrestling matches. That 4-Way match was the fun match of the night. There was a lot of action. It was, two wrestlers who are aligned, teaming up, who are in the group, and then they turn on each other, Orange and Briscoe, and it's just like it could have been a fun main event on a Collision. It was, 4 professionals doing good work, and we got to see Okada shine more than we have in a while. And so that was good, but it's not a match where you look at it and you go, oh man, it's a shame that wasn't the one thing we're talking about at the end of the night. It wasn't meant to be. But there were multiple matches that deserve to have that stature. There should have been, like, if you're going to turn Moxley heel and you're going to allot for a suffocation angle, then don't put it on the same show as an unsanctioned cage match with cinder blocks and hypodermic needle and many, many other things, by the way, that if we subtract those two things, it was still a crazy, brutal, hardcore match. Same thing with the women. And yes, MJF Moxley, that almost any other era, and this is not a compliment or a criticism, just I think a fact. Any other era, that would be a match. And when I say other era, predating the last like 5 to 10 years, that'd be a match people are talking about months later. Like, it'd be in the match of the year contendership. It used to be an archaeological dig to get good matches that you could create a top 10 list of matches for, going back to the 80s and 90s. I mean, that's why people traded VHS tapes. Now it's just 2 AEW pay-per-views. You've got a top 8 list, and they end up losing some of the punch. And you can say, well, why are you complaining? That's a lot of great matches. It is, but when you're trying to have those matches have full impact, there is, the cliche less is more can be overused and misused, but there's something to be said for like that Pac Ospreay match was great. Let that and one other thing be the major thing. WWE years ago, I heard they talked about it behind the scenes. I think it was a Kevin Dunn thing. We want our fans thinking about 2.5 things at the end of any one of our events, a TV show or pay-per-view. What are the 2 main things? And then if there's a third, what is that third? But we're not going to give them 3.5 or 5, because that's going to water down the 2 things that we have deemed most important. I agree with that philosophy for all kinds of reasons, including respecting the effort the wrestlers put forth. You don't want to forget by the end of the night. And that's a great point, Stephanie, that you're like, wait a second, I'm in my hotel room. Something amazing happened. And I'm having to like jar myself, into remembering it even happened. What's the point?
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to lose buys. AEW is a distinct promotion with great talent, a huge passionate fan base. You don't need to overserve them to keep them happy.
It's a very WWE way of thinking, Wade. Did I irritate you now?
No. I thought make your case. That's why we have a CNN panel here, 18 people talking at once.
This is why AEW pay-per-views are so great, because there's so much good stuff. And as the weekly television show has become more like WWE, more skits and backstage nonsense that I personally don't want out of my wrestling, the pay-per-views have become almost like the only place where you can get sort of a nice serving of what AEW does best. And so I much prefer that than five matches on a pay-per-view where there's 20 minutes of video in between and you get about an hour's worth of wrestling. It's just it's my preference.
Eric, I was going to cut you off before you got to the false choice there, this binary choice between something that demonstrably is on one extreme and the other. My point isn't that there shouldn't be a bunch of really, really good matches. My point is what we saw with MJF and Garcia seems to overlap the emotional crescendo that they were going for in the women's Chicago street fight, that they were going for with the post match after Danielson and Jack Perry with Mox, that they were going for in the cage. So my thing isn't dumb down the shows and have them be boring or like what and what the like who is advocating for what you just said. Like that's a weird thing to take from what I'm saying. My point is there's a lot of ways to entertain people and have great wrestling shows, but that emotional resonance of those four items that I talked about ended up blunting each other to the point where, as Stephanie said, there's a match that should have been the talk of the weekend going into Dynamite in MJF and Garcia, and there just isn't emotional bandwidth for us to really give it the full consideration we want. Chris, I can see you squirming. What do you want to say?
As usual, I come down somewhere in the middle of the two of you. I think 5 matches on a pay-per-view with 25 minutes of video is too much. I also think that
I do too, by the way.
I think
there should be 6 matches.
But what Eric mentioned is a problem of AEW's own creation. He's right. The place where you get to see the best AEW matches is on pay-per-view, but that's because they forced us to think that. If you look at this card, there's about 5 different things on here that should have either been a main event of a pay-per-view on its own or should have closed Dynamite. If you take out the plastic bag choking and you make it chloroform, which I think you could probably get away with on TV, you could close Dynamite with that. You could close Dynamite with Garcia hitting the pile driver off the top on MJF. You could use the women's street fight. We've seen that on Dynamite before. You could have taken all of those off the pay-per-view, made it 3 hours instead of 4, and everything on that pay-per-view would have meant more because there was less on it. And you take some of those big angles that deserve to be memorable and put them on their own show as the highlight of that show. You can spread this stuff out. You don't have to do it all at once,
especially with monthly pay-per-views. Roughly.
But bringing us back though, right? Like if you tease this, if you tell us this is coming, we're going to keep watching because we want to see these big angles that you didn't give us at the pay-per-view. The Attitude Era was famous for using pay-per-views to promote their TV because they were getting 8 million people watching and TV was making more money. So you would get the no finish on the pay-per-view and it would encourage you to watch the rematch the next night on Raw. But sorry, go ahead, Eric.
I have 2 points before throwing to Stephanie. Pay-per-views are the blow-off of a feud or the continuation of a feud. It's a natural wrestling cycle, right? And so to me, you're paying off the feuds you've been building up on TV. That's been going on since the dawn of pay-per-view and big shows. The other thing is AEW charges $50 a month. And so if they're giving you a bunch of filler, kind of like they did on this pre-show, people aren't going to buy it. So I think that may be the business model may be a big reason why they overstuff these things as well.
Nobody is advocating for filling the pay-per-view with what was on that pre-show. Nobody. That is a false choice, and it is not a fair argument because nobody's making it. It is a straw man argument as usual from you, Eric.
I didn't even think it should have been on the pre-show.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Nobody. There's a vast middle ground. I think the point is that, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. You want to blow off feuds. The question is, should you have multiple feuds at once where people are threatening to kill each other and anyone who supports them? And, I understand what MJF did to Garcia was hardcore, and he stretched it out, knocks him over. We see that, decent amount of wrestling. But for Garcia to come back and go, I'm going to end you and everybody who supports you in your life, you had Moxley was not vowing to kill Danielson. He surprised Danielson with attempted murder. Garcia wanted to end MJF's career, wanted to murder him. Swerve Strickland wanted to murder Hangman. Hangman wanted to murder Swerve. I don't think it's a radical argument that needs a false straw man counter argument on the vast other side that very few people would agree with. As I think you can make a stronger point, Eric, than the extreme weak opposite.
Oh no,
end.
AEW is giving me too much good stuff. Those
But
it's not
again,
about the quantity though. It's
Yeah.
about putting it all on the one show, right? I love Will Ospreay matches, all of them. I don't think he has had a bad one. I could not watch 3 hours straight of Will Ospreay because it all starts to look the same after a while.
And I want to get back to Stephanie in 1 second, but I wanted to say this one thing. With MJF and Garcia, and I've made this point before, but I want to emphasize it. They didn't need to take the feud to this level. This could have been about Garcia being an aspiring young wrestler who wants to prove himself against MJF, and MJF tricked him into thinking he was going to be a mentor for him. And then MJF screwed him over, and Garcia could have this whole feud, especially if it's going to be in the opener of a pay-per-view where you have a Chicago street fight and attempted murder and burning a house down and invading a home all going on at once. Make the issue of MJF and Garcia, and those two can talk. We've learned Garcia is up for this. MJF is one of the best talkers of his generation and multiple generations. You don't need all the stuff that they did that waters down the effect of everything else. Have Garcia go, I'm going to humiliate you. You take pride in being the best wrestler of your generation. You can talk, but you also take pride in being a wrestler. I'm going to go out there and show you that I not only can hang with you, but I can beat you. And that's the best way to get under your skin for you turning on me and lulling me into thinking that you were on my side and I should have known better. Whatever. There's a way to make that an opening match angle, an opening match storyline, and start build from there, and don't have that be where Garcia a few days before the event is vowing, ending careers and death to anyone who MJF and anyone who supports him. And that's what we're saying. So you can have a great match with MJF and Garcia. It's not about too much good wrestling. We want 4 hours of great wrestling. Well, maybe 3 hours, 20 minutes would be better, but we want great wrestling start to finish. But there's ways to do it without always going to 10 out of 10 with the personal stakes. Stephanie, back to you. Join in this conversation. Anything you want to add? And then I want to really focus on you being in the building also and get to that media Q&A too.
Okay, so I'm a huge hater of really long shows, and Tony Khan loves to do really long shows. And this year I've been to, I think, 3 AEW pay-per-views and 2 WWE pay-per-views. And I've always found the WWE ones to be a better live experience, and even watching at home, because they're shorter, they're tighter. It's like 5 matches. And if you take something like SummerSlam, I felt that every match on that show was well built and it had a purpose, and they weren't just throwing in filler. And sometimes I think that Tony Khan just wants everyone on the show, and something like Forbidden Door was so long and there were so many matches where I was like, who could possibly care about this? Like, this did not need to be there, and it was very frustrating. But I thought All Out was interesting because I actually think that most of the matches deserve to be on the show. So they were kind of a victim of their own good or intense storytelling, because you had MJF and Garcia that had this heated feud. Willow and Chris have the heated feud. Obviously Swerve and Hangman. Danielson and Perry not so much, but they built something there. So what I would have rather seen with this show is the Young Bucks tag was completely unnecessary, and that was the match where like, I'll be honest, I didn't watch that match. That match, there were full lines outside for the bathrooms and and the drinks, right? And I don't even think that the 4-way match for Okada's title needed to be on that either, really, because it wasn't something that was built up. So I think what I would have rather seen is those two matches been ditched, and maybe like Mercedes Hikaru Shida's, that's like borderline whether that should have been on a pay-per-view or not. But I think if you took out the two matches I said, then you would have had a kind of like tighter, more WWE style show where every match was important and meant something. And I think that would have been better if they kind of adopt the WWE format like a bit more and make sure that, and don't just put people on it for the sake of it. But then we did get everyone else who wasn't on the pay-per-view on the pre-show, but I honestly didn't watch that either because I'm not going to sit through that.
So Stephanie, great points in terms of length of show, what to subtract, so that things mean more. WWE's policy, and just because it's WWE doesn't mean it reflexively should be something AEW rebels against to its own, detriment. That seems like a dangerous way to go about business. If the other guys do it, then I'm not going to consider why they do it. I'm just going to say I'm not going to do it. That's for Eric. And so one of the things that they do that I think is smart, and now that AEW's increased the frequency of pay-per-views, it makes sense to do this. Save 2 or 3 of those matches that you just talked about for Dynamite or Collision, and maybe in some cases even hotshot something on Rampage. The Young Bucks can defend their titles on Rampage and build it up for a few weeks, not just a quick little backstage segment in the middle of the Dynamite and you forget about it by the end, except Excalibur breathlessly, fits it into 18 things he's plugging. Actually build it up for a few weeks and go, they're going to actually defend the tag titles, tell a story, cut promos, build it up for Rampage or Collision. Like you said, the Okada match, Stephanie, that absolutely could have been saved for a Dynamite. And it's a match where you're pretty sure who's going to win, but you don't know for sure. Same thing with the Bucks if you build it up well. Same thing with Mercedes Shida. Give them their own opportunity to be one of the 2.5 things that the majority of wrestling fans who you're aiming to please can really have the emotional bandwidth to be invested in. Give them the space to be on a show where it's about them and they're not going to be forgotten about. Because AEW is doing more pay-per-views now, you can do that. You can actually increase, because they need to, they ought to, increase their viewership by having some of these pay-per-view worthy matches be there. The Bucks and Okada do not need to be on every pay-per-view, nor does Mercedes. It's weird to say that because they're big top paid stars, but if other people seem more, quote, pay-per-view worthy, so be it. Stephanie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's because AEW is doing more pay-per-views now, this is something that Tony really needs to get right. Like, not everyone deserves a spot on the pay-per-view. Like, not everyone deserves a match. Like, I remember when I was at Money in the Bank, for example, I thought it was notable that there was no Liv Morgan match, yet she was on Raw, like non-stop on Raw, but they just didn't have a match for her because they were waiting for Rhea Ripley. So I would like Tony to think about that a little bit more. And I know that there's a whole issue of like people getting their money's worth, whether they're paying for a ticket in the arena or paying for a ticket at home. But I think 5 great matches or 6 great matches really is you getting your money's worth for it. I don't
think many people go to the theater and think, I paid my $10 for a movie ticket. Now I want to sit there for 5 hours and watch a movie that really should be 2 hours and 5 minutes. Like, I mean, or watch 2 movies at once. Like, you don't always want to, for $10, you don't need to sit there for 2 full length movies. You want to have dinner, see a movie, and go home and go to bed. Let the dog out. I like this idea that more makes it better for either the TV audience or the live audience. I think is kind of naive to how most people live their lives. I think we have and this isn't a knock on social media. This has been the case going back pre-internet. There's a certain amount of time you want to do something before you're ready to move on to something else. People have lives and they have things they have to get to. So I think when you super serve a micro audience, it's one of the contributors to AEW dropping viewers faster than people are dropping cable. And those are the statistics right now. Yeah.
You would think that like he doesn't have 3 shows a week to book. You know, there's big problems with Rampage and Collision, and
Dynamite, to a degree.
too. Yeah. So there's a lot. Like, you could maybe make Rampage a better show if you force the Young Bucks to defend the title on it, you know, to get interest. And then you've got big shows coming up, big dynamites like Grand Slam. So yeah, he needs to learn how to like pull back a bit on the pay-per-views, but everything with Tony is always more, right? That's how he does. That's how he does the angles as well. Like, that's what we were talking about before, about how everything repeats or everything escalated. It's always more.
Yeah. I said this and I'll say it again. AEW comes across to me more often than I think is healthy. It's never healthy. It comes across like a third and fourth grader sitting around going, wouldn't it be cool if? And then they just go with anything they come up with. You know, it's like there should be adults in the room, like saying, wait a second, you know, we need to pace this out. We want things to matter. There's a way to have a match like MJF and Garcia that doesn't try to one up what Swerve and Hangman are doing or even enter the same realm. And, you know, talk about in 2 weeks, there's Grand Slam. I mean, why not? Some of the matches you mentioned, Stephanie, could have been saved for that. They've got a setup of 6,000 seats in a 23,000 seat building in a stadium show. I mean, there are signs for people who are like hate watching us right now, who just think AEW can do no wrong, and anyone who criticizes them, I reflexively just go, you're a hater. You know, there's data that indicates they're doing some things that are driving people away, and it doesn't even have to be compared to WWE, but WWE is not something you enter into evidence that it's inevitable. They are maintaining or growing at a you know, very opposite direction than WWE. So, you know, it's probably a good time to look at that and say, you know, what are we doing? And is there something they're doing we can emulate, or is there at least something we should be doing instead of what we're doing to grow? Stephanie, talk about the media scrum. I mean, I don't know how many people, it's a little inside baseball, you know, what goes on at those things, but I noticed you talking about how the vibe was different. So what have you since learned, or set the stage and then tell me what you've learned about that?
This is the weirdest scrum I've ever attended. So they're doing a new format now where we have to watch the post show. So RJ City, and it was RJ and Lexi and Daddy Magic. So we had to sit and watch them for 30 minutes, do like a fully in kayfabe post show about. Sorry, Wade, you're on mute. What did you say? You were on mute.
I just
coughed. Oh, sorry.
Yep.
I'm so sorry that happened to you, Stephanie. That sounds like the worst thing ever. Worse than the pre-show.
Thank you, Eric. Yes.
You know, so they're in kayfabe talking about like the seriousness of what happened, and then, you know, to add to that, they bring on Mark Sterling and Evil Uno, 2 people that would immediately jump to my mind if I were to get over something serious, of all people. So that went on for 30 minutes, which is longer than usual. So I felt like, are they stalling here? And then also, so during the show, some people had noted on Twitter that they saw like many security people run backstage. So people were wondering if it was Brawl Out 2 or something happening. And then I had seen Sean Wassap tweet that like something had happened regarding someone in production, but like nothing, not like a fight or something. So this whole weird vibe was in the room then when RJ and Lexi and Daddy Magic left. And then Tony came in and just seemed kind of like more frazzled than usual. And they just brought him in and he sat down and he was like immediately like, hi, I really love AEW, love wrestling. I love everyone that works in the company. And I'd like to answer some questions about the TV deal, like straight out. So yeah. So I thought that's very strange. So it made me think, like, wait, did something actually like really bad happen backstage that isn't to do with the 2 attempted kayfabe murders? Because he just seemed so odd and like just the way he was saying, like, oh, I love everyone that works here, and then specifically saying, like, I want to talk about the TV deal. So then he got a question about the TV deal, but he's not announcing the TV deal. He did not announce the TV deal. He doesn't have a deal to announce. So why he wants questions specifically on a deal he can't announce, I don't know.
That's weird.
So I was sitting there and thinking that I didn't want to then ask something that wasn't about the TV deal, because the way that he was and the way that people were like milling about at the door really made it seem that something had happened where if you maybe had a question that was like not about the TV deal or serious or something, you were like putting him on the spot when it's been a rough time or something. And then as it went on, I think he took about 2 more questions. I started thinking, maybe something bad hasn't happened, and maybe there's another reason that he's doing this. Then I saw Sean Ross Sapp tweet that this whole backstage thing was a nothing burger, so nothing had happened there. Mm-hmm. So then I just thought, am I being worked here? So I then thought I will ask a question. And then he suddenly was like, well, that's it for tonight. Sorry, just going to take those questions. I really love wrestling. I really love everyone. I love everyone that works here. Bye. And he just left. And then we had people that worked in AEW being like, yay, shortest presser ever to us. Like this was a good thing.
Yeah.
And then someone else in the media said that was the biggest waste of time ever, and it cost me a lot to fly out here. Yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, I know what it's like to spend a lot of money to fly out to a show and get nothing. And then it was further reported by Sean that Tony did a 15-minute presser because he had to catch a flight to Miami. So yeah, the billionaire could miss his flight. And it was just totally weird. And I feel that he was actually trying to sell what went on in the show, like the 2 attempted murders. And that's why he was being so strange. And also before it started, they're usually hosted by Renee. Renee came into the room all dressed up like she was going to host and was just like, sorry, guys, I can't be here to host tonight, but I'm sure you understand. Because her husband had just committed attempted murder. So that really set the tone. Like when she did that, I just thought they can't be serious. They can't be seriously like having her do that before Tony Khan comes out. Yeah. So it was very weird. And obviously there were the attempted murders, but there were also other wrestlers that weren't involved in anything like that they could have brought out, like Will Ospreay or Mercedes or whoever, just to give us something. But it seems like Tony Khan had 15 minutes because he had to catch a plane, and that's all we got. And we got this weird kayfabe thing that created a strange atmosphere, and he wanted to talk about a TV deal that he can't announce. It was very bizarre.
That's very bizarre. As Lady B pointed out in the chat, Tony Khan is a strange dude. Obviously very nice, but strange. That is a strange way to handle a press conference. I don't think there's any other way to put it. Eric Krol, who's on the panel on the show today, was a columnist for the Pro Wrestling Torch newsletter decades ago. Was but it's been a working reporter in the Chicago area, covered a lot of politics, been at a lot of press conferences. Eric, what is your reaction to hearing what Stephanie just described from last night at All Out?
I mean, I'm looking at the NFL scores, and the Miami Dolphins 20, the Jacksonville Jaguars 17, and I think it was a noon Central, 1 p.m. Eastern game, so that might have been legit. The part was he? I haven't seen the presser, but was he being maybe it would be hard to tell with Tony. Was he being sarcastic? Like all anyone ever asks him about is this TV deal?
No.
It's a good question, Eric. I get why you ask it.
Yeah.
What did he actually say for those who didn't see the presser? Did he indicate that they're close, that he signed the deal?
I forget what he answered the first question, but yeah, he indicated that they were close. Then there was a man who asked him to put a percentage on it of being announced in the next month, and he went with 90%. So it's kind of just the same things he's been saying, though, because he's spent the past how long, saying that they're close or giving football analogies.
I have said I'm not reporting on this till there's a deal. Like I'm not gonna. I don't care about
for years.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm just so tired of it.
Yeah.
I feel I've always my gut has sort of been all along he's going to announce it on the 5-year anniversary show
of Dynamite.
in
a few weeks. Yeah,
that seemed likely to me.
The Lady B points out in the chat, Stephanie, that someone asked about Britt Baker and he seemed annoyed. What's the context there? What happened?
Someone just asked where Britt is because she had the match with Mercedes and we haven't seen her since that, and they're kind of not acknowledging her on TV, and we know that she was previously suspended. So yeah, someone just asked about like her status and where she is, and he just gave one of those Tony answers where he goes round and round about like Britt's a great person, great talent. We have lots of great talents and great people, and like just getting round till we get back to Britt Baker and no actual answer on where Britt Baker is. But yeah, he did seem annoyed about that question because he had just flat out stated at the beginning that he wanted TV deal questions, which is odd. And with the having to catch a flight, I have to say, like, I'm not sympathetic to that with Tony, because I mean he's probably doing it on a private plane and this could have all been organized a bit better. But he could at least, we saw like Triple H have to leave Bash in Berlin and we got Cody taking his place, but they also could have at least given us some wrestlers like Ospreay or Mercedes or anyone that could give people that had traveled there and set up their camera equipment, some kind of content other than Tony just giving non-answers about the TV deal that he wanted to talk about.
There's got to be flexibility on that private flight. I mean, I got a call from Tony Khan at 2:30 a.m. once when his jet landed to refuel, and he should be able to like dictate when the flight leaves and not have to cut a press conference short and still get back in time. I don't presume to know the logistics of it, but it's like he flies in the middle of the night. It's not like he needs to be home by midnight to get sleep. He can do that on the plane. So I don't know. Yeah.
Or you could have Tony Khan take questions first, flip the order, and put the wrestlers on after, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or we don't have to have a 30-minute pre-show that we're just sitting there in front of.
And respect the journalist, Stephanie, by not doing kayfabe. Like either say you are here as props to ask kayfabe questions, and you will not be invited back if you ask anything that's controversial or legit. Be upfront about it. That's ridiculous. People should walk out if that happens. But it's even more insulting to pretend it's an actual media Q&A. The show is over. The closing credits aired. Now we want to sit down and have an interview with people out of character. And they haven't been consistent with this, but it sounds like last night was the worst case of it, where it's like you're not there to play up your storylines. And I don't want to see Tony even joking around about, Hangman, should have been in jail. Or I had to work to keep him out of jail. It's like, no, what media wants is an intelligent conversation about your decision making creatively for something that is openly known to be scripted, and tell us about your rationale for doing it. Don't pretend that someone, you can do that. Like RJ on the pre-show, RJ City said, shouldn't Hangman be in prison or jail, like for burning down a house? Like, I don't think he was scripted to say it. That's just the natural thing that you should be thinking. But again, that's on a TV show. It shouldn't be. It's insulting to do that with the media. And frankly, I don't begrudge anybody being upset with how that sounded that went last night.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of these and I've criticized them a lot before, because I think when AEW started, they started doing this with this idea of, we're going to be open. We're not Vince McMahon. Here's Cody. You can talk to him. Here's Tony Khan. And then NXT started doing them, and now WWE do them. And somewhere along the line, AEW lost their way with them, and maybe it's because of what happened with CM Punk. Like he made it too real 2 years ago in Chicago, because that's probably the most honest anyone's ever be at a press conference, right? Was what Punk said. And with the wrestlers being in character, it is extremely frustrating. And I think what makes it worse is Tony's need or desire to sit next to every wrestler during the press conference, which is maybe why we didn't get any wrestlers last night, because Tony won't have them out there unless he's sitting next to them, which just makes him look bad because he was then sat next to CM Punk when he did the Brawl Out, and then he ends up like doing stuff like that press conference where Jericho ended up throwing something that hit a reporter, and then Tony Khan's sitting there, and this is just a dumb kayfabe angle, and Tony has to just sit there and be like, well, that was bad anyway, on to talking about the attendance or like the figures. Like, he then has to take that boss role when we've just seen him not act as a boss, and we saw him do that for real as well. So his decision to just sit there the whole time is just really silly and leads to all these awkward situations. Like, I wrote about the Forbidden Door one. I ended up walking out of that one because they decided at past midnight to start this presser, and we had Tony Khan sitting there when Mariah May, Tony Storm, and Mina Shirakawa just decided to do a dance for us, and Tony Storm said that she wouldn't answer any of our questions because we were all shit, and Tony Khan's just sitting there while these wrestlers are doing that in character. And then you'll get a wrestler like Will Ospreay who's being really honest and telling you about his life. So it's always up and down with the tone of these things, but Tony putting himself there for every single shift in tone is not a good idea. But last night's, I thought, was just the most kayfabe one ever, even more so than the other stuff we've seen, just because of Tony's weird acting and just the general vibe that he created.
Yeah. Chris, jump on in.
Yeah. Did you get any sense that maybe there was some feeling backstage that the show wasn't great and people didn't really want to come out and talk about it? Because like, for Tony to not want to be there, I mean, it's not like he serves any useful purpose. From what I remember of the guy, he's living his dream right now, and sitting next to those wrestlers is just actively something he wants to do, right? He's finally at the cool kids table, is the way he sees it. But did it feel like maybe there was some resentment or some dissatisfaction with the product that could have led to this?
That's not a feeling I got, but it would have been hard to tell because I didn't, have contact with any of the wrestlers. But no, I do think it was a mixture of his flight and wanting to sell the idea that something really bad had happened. And I think that's why he sent Ray out there like that beforehand too. I mean, because actually, sorry, I was just going to add that when it ended, that's when I knew for sure that nothing actually bad had happened backstage, because of how the people working for AEW behind the scenes acted, being like, yay, short press conference. And I just thought, okay, well, if it was short because, I don't know, someone had a heart attack backstage or something, you wouldn't be acting like that. So, yeah, they were certainly happy with how the show went.
Good point. Yeah. Stephanie, you've been to a lot of those shows in Chicago. Just talk about the vibe in the building and how it's changed compared to the past in any way that you noticed.
Definitely a declining audience. I've been to a lot of Chicago shows and I've noticed the numbers go down. And I didn't go to All Out last year, but I went the year before. It was a much bigger crowd. That was the year that Punk did his muffin promo. And that was a huge crowd. And something that struck me was there's like back or side doors to the arena that they open as like a smoking area. And the 2 years ago when I went there, they had merch stands and stuff out there, which I thought was probably because there was such a big crowd, and there wasn't any like this year, and it did just feel like a much smaller crowd. It was kind of a sign of how when I'd gone there 2 years before, like the merch was all sold out like before the show even started. There was just so many people, and it felt like just being in this huge crowd, even just walking around. And this year it felt much emptier. Like there was much more space and much shorter queues for merch, concessions, whatever. And I thought that the crowd were really good. They gave Jack Perry a lot of heat being in Chicago, but it still doesn't compare to what the early days of AEW shows in Chicago were like. But I think, and it's a mixture of the decline in popularity and the fact that they just completely rinsed that market. It's bizarre. I mean, that Dynamite that was last week, or the one after Wembley, they had this amazing Wembley show, and then they show up in Champaign, which is right near Chicago, to a tiny audience before they're about to have a pay-per-view outside Chicago. It doesn't seem logical.
Champaign is 2 hours south of the southwest suburbs, so 3 hours from the city. That's where I was this weekend, visiting my son at college. But that was truly a bizarre going from London to Champaign, Illinois. But his that's where he grew up. I think partly that's where his family's from. So
yeah.
Chris, is there anything? Oh, go ahead, Stephanie, please.
No, I'm just going to say that they do the Thanksgiving Dynamite in Chicago every year, and I'm on, I think, 3 of those, and that's a really good gauge, because I feel that they've gone down every year as far as like the attendance and just the crowd enthusiasm. And I think the last time I went, I thought the crowd were pretty dead, and it almost felt kind of sad, because the first one I went to of that, it was so heated, and you just felt that you were like, this was the hot product, like this was where the cool people were, this was where all the wrestling fans had come to, and you just don't get that same vibe anymore.
I'm tempted to ask a big picture question, but we kept you here a long time. Chris, is there anything you want to ask Stephanie about her in-person experience? And then we have got some video callers on hold too that I want to get to also.
Yeah, nothing's really coming to mind that we haven't already discussed. It's just such a shame, because there are so many people out there who will refuse to admit that any of what we're saying is true about the AEW attendances and audiences. And did you see any of that? That's a good point. Did you get the full AEW experience? Like, did you have the diehards there talking about how great it was as they exited the building and stuff? Or was there any sort of general feeling that you got about the show as a whole?
Yeah. So I didn't leave at the same time as the fans because of the scrum. But as far as what I heard from people talking, there were a lot of really diehard AEW fans there. But I also, I do hear a lot of people at these shows, talking about WWE stuff too. And that's something that I've noticed more recently, that there seems to be, more people that are kind of less knowledgeable about AEW coming to these shows. And I don't know if that's because the more hardcore base is dwindling, and now they're getting people that just see, oh, AEW's in town. I like WWE. I like wrestling. I might as well go. But no, I didn't really hear much talk from the fans. I did think it was funny that, so I was staying in a hotel near the arena, and that happened to be where Conrad Thompson was hosting a convention, his Top Guy convention for all his podcasters and fans of his podcast. And I did not know that was happening. But if you want anti-AEW talk, that bar at night was the place to be. It was a lot of fans just talking about how much they don't like AEW and how they weren't going to All Out, and they were just in Chicago for the Conrad convention. So that was a pretty strange experience for me, just listening to all this.
So not only did you have to sit through that awful post show, you had to be in a place where a bunch of people think Eric Bischoff is a credible person to interview about anything wrestling related in the year 2024. That sounds like a terrible time.
Eric Bischoff was at the bar. He was the only notable person. So he was in the middle of all these conversations.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, Conrad Thompson's bad enough, but then you throw Bischoff on top of it. At least Cornette wasn't there. Right? Cornette wasn't there?
No.
Oh.
Cornette was not there.
Stephanie, somebody in the chat asked if there were Yeet chants or anything WWE related, or if there were just, in dead parts. Not that there was a lot of dead spots on the show. It's pretty rapid fire. But any indication of there being WWE fans in the building, more into the WWE product in any way that was vocalized?
No, I didn't hear any yeet chants or anything like that. There were the yes chants when Brian encouraged them, but no. But I will say one thing I've noticed going to these events and having the opportunity now being in North America to go to WWE pay-per-view too is that WWE fans are just louder and more excited and chantier in general, like going to Money in the Bank. Yep. Everyone was outside Money in the Bank chanting yeet or whatever chant someone could start. The same at SummerSlam. And for when I went to Forbidden Door, a big takeaway of mine was this walk that you had to do from where the train left you off to the arena, and how it was just like this completely silent, like somber march to the arena that all these wrestling fans were doing. Wrestling fans who are usually quite rowdy, whereas if you go to a WWE event, there would have been people doing chants and everything there. So there's I don't know if it's just a reflection of the product not being hot at the minute, or just what their fan base is like, but there's definitely not the same atmosphere, like party atmosphere of people chanting and stuff in general at AEW shows. Yeah.
Interesting. Yep. Stephanie, anything else you want to add before we let you go? You've stayed with us a long time here. I really appreciate it.
I saw some people mention merch in the chat. The merch is still really bad. It's very comical because they have a lot of t-shirts that tell you the event. So it's all, I was there, I was at All Out. Saw the same thing at All In. I saw a pink Darby Allin hoodie, which looked cool, but it was $75. But they are so unwilling to produce merchandise at live shows for their stars. And I mean, one of their merch guys even talked about this on Twitter recently, like basically saying it wasn't cost effective or whatever. But when you see the WWE fans all in Yeet t-shirts, and you go to a show and they're not selling t-shirts for Swerve, they're not selling t-shirts for Brian, they're not selling t-shirts, and especially the ex-WWE guys, that because at any of these shows, I've noticed that people you're going to hear talked about most are Brian, Mox, and Jericho. Never seen t-shirts for them. They're not printing t-shirts for their stars, so you don't get the visual of like loads of people in like Swerve t-shirts in the crowd or something, or yes t-shirts in the crowd. And then they were selling at this event, it was either AEW boxer shorts or AEW swim shorts, right? I couldn't tell close enough what kind of shorts they were, and I just thought, like, whose idea was it to sell those, yet no one is having the idea to print t-shirts for Swerve or Danielson? Like, they always have such random pieces of merch like that you just thought, like, why is this the great idea? Why is, like, I, for example, have an AEW luggage tag for my suitcase, and when I brought it out last week, my mom was like, where did you get that, and why did Tony have the idea to print that, yet he's not printing t-shirts for his big stars? And I'm like, yeah, I know. So the merch is always bad. And Pro Wrestling Tees is in Chicago, so you'd think they could get more stuff brought out. But the first All Out I went to they did Rampage the night before, and I remember asking them if they were restocking CM Punk shirts for the next night, and they said no. And I just thought, how can you do that? Not even restock enough shirts for like two big shows. But yeah, so for the people asking, the merch is still bad. That's just something I want Tony to be asked. Like, I'd like a robust answer about why every wrestling company in history has for its time. I mean, Vern Gagne discovered it when Hulk Hogan took off. Hulkamania took off before Hulk went to WWF, and t-shirt merch was one of the issues that Hogan and Vern had an issue over. I mean, like, how that was 40 years ago. How are we not more than 40 years ago? I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
I think Pro Wrestling Tees has a lot to do with that, because the wrestlers are selling their own shirts, and Pro Wrestling Tees takes a smaller cut than WWE does. So by AEW printing the shirts, the wrestlers would actually make less money off selling their own merch. I mean, you only have to look at Danhausen to see how lucrative it can be to sell shirts when you're not even on TV. And bless Danhausen, I'm a fan. But he's not on television, and he's still outselling a lot of people who are. So I think that's part of the problem.
If Target says they want to sell my art, but they're going to take 70% of the profit, or I can take, 90% of the profit going to art shows, traveling around the country in a van, I'll take Target. You know what I mean? Like, there's something to be said for the distribution model being exponentially bigger. And Pro Wrestling Tees is big. So maybe, the Target art analogy might not hold up in every way. But like, I'm sorry, AEW, who've never mentioned their website on TV that I've ever heard. Like, they don't, I mean, there's parts of their business that just doesn't interest Tony, and it's weird. And to not be marketing just AEW branded merchandise like on your own website, and to not have robust options that are separate from Pro Wrestling Tees at the live arenas is still baffling to me. I would think thousands of fans going to an arena are going to buy t-shirts who aren't going to ever buy it online. They want that impulse buy. Mm-hmm. I was at the show, here's my thing. So I don't care what the percent cut is. That should be something Tony Khan at the 5-year mark should have figured out how to take care of. But it's his business. I mean, everybody has their decisions, and sometimes on the outside it seems puzzling. But I'd like to hear his answer on it and understand better. Someone in chat says they have AEW couches. So
yes, they do. That's another example of the odd things they'll decide to produce while neglecting live show t-shirts.
Yeah, exactly. All right, cool. Stephanie, anything else you want to mention before I let you
go? No, I don't think so. Right. I think the only thing I'd say is like a brief point is I do think AEW is escalating in violence. And I know this was on pay-per-view, but in violence and like adult content, there's been more F-bombs recently. And I do wonder if that's connected to the TV deal and Tony's maybe concerns about going against WWE on Netflix, where WWE will have more leeway on things on Netflix. Yeah. I just think that's something like to think about, and something that I've been thinking about.
I sensed it in the pre-show when we got the references to Chicago. All you fans in Chicago have been blown, and then one woman calling another woman a skank. And we haven't heard, I don't think I've heard skank on TV since TNA had a rule they had to have women call each other that at least 3 to 4 times per show per week for months and months, if not years. And I was like, why? It's just tawdry. It's not classy it's not brand building. It feels, like the dark corner at 3 p.m. of a strip club with some sad guy sitting in the corner trying to figure out what do guys want to hear? Like, that person shouldn't be writing your TV show. The guy who's at the strip club in the afternoon alone in a dark corner. And when I hear women call each other skanks, I think, okay, now we're really playing to a tawdry part, an audience that's into tawdry stuff. Like, why does that like, and again, TNA was all about like, oh, you came from a stripper pole. Like, it was constant references, all the women. It was so, and we got that last night for the first time. AEW has actually, like, with some exceptions. I mean, I think you can be you can be proud to have your young daughter, 12-year-old daughter, watching the women of AEW. It's pro wrestling. They're fighting, they're yelling, but that came across to me as like setting a tone that I felt like you're saying, Stephanie, felt like, oh, we have to go some places now in case WWE does. Mm-hmm. And I don't think
that was really bad. Especially, it involved Mariah May, who I wasn't the biggest fan of Mariah May and Tony Storm's story, but it was certainly a well thought out story that really built her character and arc, and then her ending up on this pre-show segment where, I mean, it just reminded me of some of the terrible promos that Sable and Jacqueline would do against each other, when it would be like skank ho back and forth. And it's wild. And look, I don't know who wrote that. Maybe Mariah and Sky Blue came up with it together, but it's concerning that it's only recently that Tony's hired a female writer, but now we're getting skank said on a show for the first time. It's not a good look. Like, to me, that kind of thing is more off-putting to me than the level of violence. Like, I didn't like that at all.
Linda Butler in the chat says, my 8-year-old nephew loves watching women's wrestling. He's a little Lothario, and I don't want him to watch if they're going to be tossing slurs at each other like that. So again, this comes down to it's not about being delicate, people who can't handle edgy stuff. It's just, is it really what you want your brand to be known for? Is it really attracting more people than it's turning off? This isn't about, we can't handle edgy stuff that people say in the real world. It's like you should curate what you want on your TV show that represents your brand and how you market it. And that stuff, I think, is tawdry. And I don't think AEW should want tawdry being, a word that comes to mind when you watch their product. Stephanie, tell people how they can, how people can see more of you, hear more of you talking wrestling on your various channels.
Yeah, you can go find my YouTube channel, Stephanie Chase Wrestling. I think I'll be going live sometime tomorrow afternoon to talk a little bit more about my experiences at All Out.
Awesome.
And you can find my Substack, which is just Stephanie Chase, where I'll be writing about All Out and probably the strange media experience at that show too. So look out for that. And I'm on Twitter at Stephanie M. Chase.
Stephanie, thank you so much. We'll have you on, hopefully on the Flagship or post show again very soon here also.
Thanks, Wade. Bye, Chris and Eric.
Bye, Steph.
Take care.
All right. Awesome. All right. Eric, anything you want to inject in this conversation before we get to our next video caller?
Overall, I thought the show was very good, and I was a thumbs up. My best match was Ospreay and Pac, and my worst match was the Acclaim. I don't know which is right. I don't know which one is right, and I'm trying to cover my bases. And the worst match was the Acclaimed versus the Iron Savages.
Our early poll results on our website, Ospreay and Pac has 55% of best match votes. Hangman Swerve at 28%, and Statlander Willow, which on another show could have been best match, got 8%. Poor MJF and Garcia got 3%. That could have been the best match if it was in a main event or semi-main event spot, and there it is at 3%. I know, Eric, your case is an embarrassment of riches, and I say MJF and Garcia deserve to be in the conversation as the best match.
The context there is supposedly the Daniel Garcia heavy heat angle that originally wrote him off TV was in case he left for WWE or somewhere else, and then they didn't know if they didn't know they were. So that was writing him off. They didn't know if they were going to do the match, and supposedly it's been reported if he had signed his new deal with AEW, he would have gone over, which I don't know if that works for MJF, brother. But
he would have been booked to win, yeah.
Yeah, but he didn't.
MJF, I think, would be, well, I don't know. I shouldn't say. I think he'd be happy to do a job for somebody that in reality, MJF has enough pull with Tony Khan. I mean, he's had his fallings out with Tony Khan, but I mean, I know those two talk on the phone a lot. They're not shy about, well, MJF's not shy about it being known that, he has, as a main event guy, has the ear of the boss. And a lot of other people do too, but it's not like he's just off in his own world, never communicating with Tony. If he didn't want to fight Danny Garcia, he could probably veto that feud. You know what I mean? Like, that's a sign of respect and admiration for Garcia. If Garcia signs with the company, MJF wants to work with him. He's a really good opponent. I think he would have happily, done the job to him. I don't think he would have put up a fuss. There's some wrestlers he probably doesn't want to lose clean to, and we know there's a lot of wrestlers in locker rooms who don't want to lose to certain people. I think MJF would be happy to elevate Garcia. Garcia is well liked and respected.
Sure, but he didn't, and presumably the reason is Garcia hasn't re-signed, so that
right, and he should,
the big W, yeah.
It's and it makes sense. Garcia should not beat MJF if he's not long term signed to AEW.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, does Danny Garcia think he's going to be well used on the WWE main roster if that's where he goes? I mean, he's a little on the skinnier side for what they like to push. He could probably do great at NXT, but it's NXT and it's not main roster money. So just interesting to me, but every wrestler's got to negotiate his own deal and choose his own path.
Yeah. And I don't know what AEW is offering versus WWE. I mean, he might be getting mid-card money offers from both. And there's a temptation to go to WWE if he's in a circle of people that exist in AEW who complain about AEW, who work for AEW. And I don't know that he's part of that group. What was I going to add? Well, anyway, let's get to our next video caller. Joe from New York's been on hold quite a while. Joe, thanks for your patience. We're not going to spend a ton of time just because we're running so long here. So because I want to get to some of our super chats also. Joe, thanks for calling. What's on your mind about All Out?
Well, just based on, I didn't see the show, but I'm just based on everything I've heard about it, the violence and everything. I mean, this company really needs to get its act together, because I wouldn't give them a TV contract because I don't think they deserve one. I think they should be going to YouTube, because they don't make adjustments. This company has been going downhill for the better part of 2 years now. And Tony Khan is worse than Vince McMahon. He makes no adjustments. Zero. He's done nothing. The ratings have gone to the toilet, and he's still doing nothing. And if I'm TNT, why would I give them a TV contract? Every week that goes by, their ratings go down more and more. I don't need to give them money.
So
they should go to YouTube.
As I noted, Joe, in the ratings report on Dynamite, where I talked about the numbers being down in comparisons year over year, they are still, despite bad news when you look into the numbers relative to past years, they're still a gem of a program for TNT and TBS. I mean, cable has almost nothing left that anybody watches. It's some a rare movie, but it's mostly college and pro sports, and some award shows or something like that might pop a rating. I mean, it's just, there's not a lot left that's drawing. There's HGTV does well. There's some Bravo reality series that do well, but AEW is a 52 weeks out of the year program that's giving 5 hours of programming. 2 of those hours are sometimes the top 18 to 49 demo rating, and does just really well in terms of overall viewership too. So a lot of this is relative, and so there is a value that AEW has for TNT and TBS. This is not 1995 or 2000. I mean, it's a different world. TNT and TBS they don't have the pull that they used to have, and they can't be picky. AEW is a proven commodity. It's not where I think it could be or should be viewership wise, and I would have my concerns if I'm them. But AEW is way too big to just be, quote, relegated to YouTube as a weekly series with the budget that they have. Chris, do you want to chime in on that?
I mean, it's the same argument that we've been having, right? Like, AEW continues to fall, and yes, they're still at the top of the rankings, but those rankings are going to mean even less once WWE is on Netflix. That's where people are spending their time now, is on streaming platforms. It's on YouTube. You mentioned that AEW doesn't talk about their website. I don't think WWE does anymore either.
Yeah.
Websites don't matter now. Social media is everything. Yeah. That's where all the attention needs to go. And so AEW is almost like they're hanging on, not because they're a quality program and not because they draw a lot of viewers. It's because they're the best of a bad lot of options. Like you said, TNT and TBS is not exactly attracting a lot of attention, except for them throwing their toys out of the pram trying to keep the NBA on their channel. I mean, Survivor is about to start. That's going to take a lot of viewers away. And just as a related thing, I found it incredibly amusing when John Morrison was on Survivor and one person recognized him of the contestants. You think that would have happened at the height of the Attitude Era? Like, the viewership isn't there for pro wrestling, and it's even less there for AEW. They do need to do something, because at some point those numbers are going to drop below the part where TNT says it's worth keeping you. And there's no reason to think that they're going to stop dropping, because nothing's changing. And
they need big crowds. I mean, they've found a way to make 3,000 look pretty good on TV. They're not going to be able to make 1,200 people or 1,800 people look good on TV. And I said, when Collision was announced, I said, my concern isn't Collision ratings watering down Dynamite ratings as much as I'm concerned about the ticket buying appetite of AEW's audience not being able to fill buildings enough to keep AEW looking major league. You need to look major league for your wrestlers to seem like stars. And you need your wrestlers to seem like stars to sell pay-per-views and sell tickets and have people care enough to watch your TV show in large numbers that grow. And AEW's on the cusp of that. They're running smaller buildings. They're drawing smaller crowds. It's not greed. I mean, it's living in the 90s, expanding to Collision and Rampage. Whole other conversation, big picture, I'll be short. But when you expand these hours of TV so that you can get a TV deal, I understand the people in Tony's ear and Tony's own thoughts. That's the obvious thing to do. But there are consequences when you're not WWE or WCW at their peak when they were expanding. AEW when they added Collision was showing signs of decline. And they weren't at the level that WCW was in terms of attendance, nor WWE, when they expanded their television hours in the 90s. Tony is reenacting, reliving what he lived through in the Attitude Era. And there are differences in the landscape that he's not accounting for when he makes some of his business decisions. And I think there's a big risk that things look so minor league now to some WWE fans relative to WWE's growth that is hurting AEW in a way that you can't measure. I mean, you can't, it's more than, it's probably qualifies as speculation. There's no way to know, but it's common sense to think that it's very possible, if not likely, a factor in AEW's decline. Eric, do you want to chime in on this at all, or I can go back to Joe?
Couple of Debbie Downers here on this live stream. AEW, according to Tony Khan, about to become a profitable company through their TV deal. We will see what kind of streaming component is part of the new TV deal. I would suspect, since Tony loves being on TNT and TBS, that the streaming component will be Max, right? That's what Warner
Right.
Brothers is kind of consolidated behind, so no big guess there. And boy, if you guys are down about the amount of hours AEW has on TV now, they just copyrighted, what is it? AEW Shockwave. So we could be getting another hour or two of TV in some fashion if you weren't already exhausted.
We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, I mean, it's. I don't think there's anything Debbie Downer about what we're saying. It's great if they can be profitable, but that does not conflict with anything about what I said. I mean, attendance is down, ratings are down, expanding Collision is accelerating. It is damaging Dynamite being a hot product. I mean, all those things can be true at once. I mean, if he manages to be profitable at a time that he can't sell 6,000 tickets for Arthur Ashe, and he's drawing, at risk of drawing under 3,000 regularly for TV shows where they have to pick their camera angles. Those all can be true at the same time. I'm not saying they're going out of business. I'm saying they're making it really hard to grow and compete with WWE for talent and for a lot of fans' eyeballs who want to watch a major league product, not a niche product for sickos, however you interpret that term. All right. Go ahead, Eric. I heard a wind up.
That was me. I was just going to say, I'm not an accountant. I do play one on TV occasionally. Profitable can mean a lot of things. And if there was a shareholder injection, it might look like on their books they're profitable. But who knows? Like we are not privy to their financial records. They're not a publicly traded company. We never will be.
Yeah.
I desperately want this product to succeed because I saw what it was when it started, when it was drawing 1 million plus, and Wade's pie in the sky talk of a second million and me saying, where's the first?
Yeah.
There is potential here, and there is so much good. It's just they can't get out of their own way.
Yeah. All right, Joe, back to you for a quick follow-up, and then we'll get to Sean from Tennessee, who's up next. Joey, I muted you, Joe. Sorry. That's my fault. Go ahead, Joe.
I'm sorry. I think what AEW needs to do is stop trying to be the wrestling company and be WWE, the adult version. Because WWE is still very much the kiddie version. Even now, they're not the adult version. AEW book like WWE, but do it on the adult level. Create one champion, one world champion, one mid card, one tag title, one women's title. That's it. Make the championship mean something. Make the wrestling feel real. Now, everybody knows it's scripted, but make it feel real. Present it in a way that it's interesting. Make it adult.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate Chris. Yep. Appreciate it. Any thoughts, Chris, on what Joe had to say there?
Making AEW into WWE. It's a
for
shame.
Adults.
It's a shame. Zach from Texas isn't in the chat because oh boy, would that have started him off. For adults, that unfortunately, anytime you use the word adult when you're talking about entertainment, it lends a completely different angle to it that I'm not sure is what was meant there. There's some merit to it. Cutting down the number of titles is definitely a plus. Adding a more serious tone. That's what it was supposed to be, right? This was supposed to be sports oriented,
a sports league,
and more serious. And it's just never been that. And you know, the rankings is often cited as a bad idea and you can't make it work, but it was the only thing that really set AEW apart. And they've just given up on so many things and tried to do other things that just aren't working. Like you mentioned CZW earlier. I didn't even know they still existed. There's a reason GCW doesn't have a TV deal. It's because people don't want to watch that stuff. And yet here we are trying to emulate it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's bring Sean into the mix. He'll be our last video caller. Then we'll get to our super chats. By the way, I've been remiss in that. We've been so busy with our panel here. Sean, welcome. You were one of the super chatters. Thank you. What's on your mind about all our topics today?
Lots of them. Holy cow. Well, first I'll say I my super chat was there, so like I'll just call in because I get it out of the way. It's a long show anyway. Chris, I've always wanted to be on here with you, man.
You said AW said they won't show it. Reference to the asphyxiation. I'm just tongue tied. Yes.
Yes.
Bag over the head. That was your super chat.
Bag over the head. Yes.
Bag
over the head. Yes.
Yeah.
They Tony's
it's like it didn't happen.
It's too violent. We can't do it. It's too graphic. We can't do it. It's like, well, don't do it then, and then you won't have to worry about it. God bless America. Anyway, Chris, real quick. I've wanted to be on here with you for a while. I've heard you on the calling shows back in the day. I've always appreciated what you bring. I think you're very fair in everything you talk about, AEW, WWE, whatever it is. I appreciate you. New Japan, I wish I watched it, but I've heard lately it's pretty rough, so I'm glad I'm not watching it as much, and I'm sorry that you have to cover it as much as you do, but I know you love it, and that's good. That's a good thing.
It's a good time to get in, Sean.
Eric, always fun talking to you, man. Always a pleasure. So I did not see the show, mostly money issues for me, but the other was the build to me wasn't as great. But my other super chat was going back to Swerve, because we haven't talked about this at all. Okay, so Swerve, the storyline with Hangman's been a little too much for me personally, but, I was trying to invest in it. I've been trying to invest in it. I want to, So Swerve gets his house burned down. Then he loses. So to me, that's already weird. You get your house burned down. We feel bad for you. Then you lose. Hangman, almost get your back broken in half. Like, where does he go from here? Because he just lost to Danielson, which I was against it from day one. I thought Danielson didn't need a title in AEW just to have it on the lineage. I just think that's ridiculous. I just think put the person who is doing a great job with the title in Swerve. We're behind him. We like him. He's doing really well. But then he loses that, and now he loses this. Where does he go from here? I don't know what kind of story you think they're going to tell with him going forward, because I think he's in a tough spot now. I really do.
Chris. Eric. You're back. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it was reported that he had planned to take some time off. And so this was sort of writing him off the show for a little bit. I'm curious to see how long will that be? Are you writing him off for the next pay-per-view cycle, which is I think it's in Washington State, where he's from, which is a little weird. But when you want to take time off, you want to take time off. Is he coming back in January? Is he missing the Continental Classic where he kind of made his mark last year? I hope not. Would love to see him in the Continental Classic and to not lose his momentum. I mean, to answer your question, I mean, he could come back as a babyface and stand with Danielson against Moxley and company, right? There's any number of heels he could feud with. He could challenge Okada for the Continental title. Plenty of options. Just, pick a heel that you want to match him up with.
Chris, you want to add anything to that?
Okada just needs to not have the Continental title.
Yes.
Have someone drop that far down the card.
Oh my God.
I actually thought Okada was going to lose to Takeshita last night. I thought that's why they did the 4-way, and it was a good way to get the belt off him. Anyway, Swerve has to go away for a bit, because how do you end that feud there? You've gone back and forth between these two, one-upping each other in terms of horrendous acts. So now, with what's just happened to Swerve, like, can he really just walk away from Hangman now? Like, how do you put that over in the storyline? I'm done chasing this guy who burned down my house and stabbed me through the face with a needle on television.
Right. So I'm going to coexist in the locker room with him.
Yeah. I guess it's done. I've had my revenge. No, you haven't. So he's got to go away, and hopefully he's gone long enough that we've moved on, even if he shouldn't have. And yeah, I think it's got to be a couple of months, unfortunately.
But even then, it's when you go to these places. I'm sorry,
you can't forget about it. You can't forget about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is again, as a third and fourth graders going, wouldn't it be cool if, with no thoughts about the long-term consequences for what they're doing. How do Hangman and Swerve coexist in a locker room ever again with what they've been through? How do you tell a story not of reconciliation, not of we get together for a common enemy, which would be ridiculous, but just coexisting in a locker room? And then the idea is, well, nobody believes it's real anyway. Right. The goal of wrestling is to create a world in which you can immerse yourself in it, where you're not reminded of that and hit over the head with the fact that this couldn't really happen. You create a rule where there's rules of engagement, there's a structure to it, and everything exists within that structure in a logical way that's consistent. And then people aren't reminded of it not being real. This notion that, well, no one thinks it's real, so we can do anything, is stupid with two O's in the middle. It's a stupid way to look at wrestling. It doesn't draw. It's counterproductive. It's self-defeating. The goal is to make it seem as real as possible, and not just the sugar rush of oh, what if we do this? People will be shocked. And the dumbest reason to do anything is, oh, it got a big social media buzz. To what end? Can you like look at the big picture and understand there's more important things than the ephemeral pop of some numbers? Like, put out a product that has a higher level of people watching your product and paying for it, as opposed to the sugar rush that you get, the dopamine rush of a pop in social media. There's some metrics that you should not guide your actions into doing dumb things. And social media, pops and social media reaction is a dumb metric to be your compass or your North Star for your decision making. Chris.
I'm just curious, Eric. I know you've defended a lot of stuff on the show. Where do you think they can go with Swerve next? Like, do you think he can legitimately walk away from this feud? Like, where do you see them going next?
Of course, people have had blood feuds in wrestling for 40, 50 years. And then they come, you come back and you have your new marriage, your new partnership, your new opponent. Who that is, I haven't really thought yet. I mean, they've got Swerve. They're gonna be a little star, because Swerve and MJF are taking time off around the same time. So my guess is they're going to go with Moxley Danielson again as the top feud and top direction. But just when you're ready, bring back Swerve and figure out a good opponent with him. And wrestling, the public has short memories. Wrestling fans have short memories. And you say Swerve can come back, address where he's been. I needed some time off after this Hangman Page thing, and then just move into the next program. I don't think it needs to be super complicated. Wrestlers have lost blood feuds and come back. There will, to your point, they're going to have to build him back up, though. I think you do lose a little bit, no matter what promotion you're wrestling for, when you lose 2 pay-per-view main events in a row.
Yeah, I just thought they were in a good spot with them, and yeah, people could say, well, the ratings have been poor. But the ratings are poor in AEW for a lot of reasons. That ain't the main one. There's a lot of reasons. Eric, no offense, there's a lot of reasons why AEW's down. Okay, they're going to go to Rupp Arena Wednesday for Dynamite. They haven't even sold 3,000 tickets at Rupp Arena. That place is huge. Like, it feels just right now. It has that minor league feel to it. Like the stars, and I'm with you guys. I like AEW. I watch Dynamite every week. I watch most of the pay-per-views. I want them to succeed too. I don't have anything against AEW. WWE is just a better product right now. It's better to watch, and it gets you more invested in characters, and it tells a story without having to go to the stuff they did. And going back to Mox, I just saw the highlight on people showing what happened. I mean, you just can't do that, and you just can't do it. It's just over the top. It's ridiculous. You can't defend it. I don't know how anybody can defend that. And with Mox, I guess with this kind of an angle, they were like, well, we've got to get him booed. This is the way we could do it. And maybe you can, because how can you not boo somebody that literally tries to kill, like literally in front of you, like suffocates them. So does Mox beat Danielson? Does Mox win the title? Because I feel like maybe that'll get, the only thing that can get Mox going is maybe have to put the title back on him, because Danielson just doesn't need it. And I think they need to go somewhere else right now.
Imagine watching a game show where the top prize is $25,000 and the ratings sag after 3 years. So they go, now the top prize is we don't cut off your fingers. and then they try to get you excited about $25,000 on the next episode. Like, I'm sorry, you've changed the game when you burn down houses, when you say I'm going to kill you and I'm going to make your people who support you suffer. And I get wrestling's done this. Stop saying that as a reason to keep doing dumb things. It's always been counterproductive. It's always been a dopamine rush, or the act of desperate bookers who don't understand the finesse of the world that you create with pro wrestling, and how absolutely successful and immersively entertaining it can be. If the number one reason, with occasional exception for a blood feud where it gets a little bit more, it's for championships and pride. That should be enough. When you're going to burning houses down and all this, suffocating people to turn heel, it's just admitting defeat. It admits you don't know how to promote professional wrestling in a way that where the championships are what we're there to watch happen. Like Survivor, it's about you're a Survivor winner. Someone brought that up, and $1 million and the pride of winning. You don't need to add to that formula. They've got the structure and it works. They could do other things that would pop ratings, but that would disintegrate the integrity of the structure that's proven to work. Really good, smart, effective, efficient wrestling promoters don't need to burn houses down and all the other crazy stuff that Kane did and Triple H has done with sledgehammers and a lot of the Undertaker stuff worked, and it was kind of like, okay, we got this lane over here, but a lot of the Undertaker stuff didn't work, and a lot of it made people roll their eyes and took away from other things they were doing. So anyway, that's my timeless rant that if you're good at what you do, you don't need to burn houses down and put plastic bags over people's heads and inject people with needles. You can have a blood feud, but when there's no rules ever, how do you top that? There should be some structure so that when you say it's an unsanctioned match, you don't have to go as far as AEW did to try to get shock value. This idea we're going to top ourselves as third and fourth graders sitting around fantasy booking. We need adults in the room to go, come on, let's grow up.
And this gets at what is the most important thing to you, Wade. It's order and rules and structure. It's just what you like in your wrestling. Not everybody is like that. I'm looking at Cage Match, 9.25 overall rating for this show. Now that's
right, of course,
probably about a point higher than I would go. I mean, I had the show at maybe an 8 out of 10. Show was
people like cupcakes and donuts, and they're going to rate it a 9.5 experience, Eric. That has nothing to do with what I just said for 3 minutes. You as usual completely missed my point. My point is you can give people donuts. It's not nutrition. It's not sustainable.
They drew TV ratings down even above. And the one thing I do appreciate that you do is you compare it to the.
One thing you appreciate. That's good to know.
You hold constant the number of cable universe homes, which is the true comparison to do. I think it's the closest you can get, and they're down even above that. So the attendance is down. 9,000 people in Chicago, successful 6-figure pay-per-view buy. So you could be a profitable wrestling company without everything making sense and having all these rules in order and having it be perfectly booked. By the way, no wrestling company in the world exists like that. It just does not exist.
There's never been a newspaper that's gone out without a typo, but it doedosn't mean you don't hire copy editors to try to minimize typos. This idea that if it can't be perfect, we should just give up on all the really logical things I just said that make historical sense, that promoters who don't go for the sugar rush and say, hey, there's something that's never been done before, so let's do it, as opposed to thinking, why has it never been done before?
People have made money without having every I dotted and T crossed. It's not like it's not
right, but your goal should be to not make things harder for you later.
Your goal should be, and that's fine. That's your.
You never rebut what I say. You just create a straw man and tackle it.
No.
Yes, you do. You don't listen to what I say. You listen to some dumbed down argument that's beneath me, that's insulting, that you think that's what I'm saying.
It isn't insulting. You are on record for years now talking about how you value order and everything making sense and every detail being meshing together.
That's not what that's not what I said. That's like, how do you take that from what I said? What I said is, going for a 9-point score or a social media buzz by hotshot booking in a way that numbs your audience to all the other things that sustain you year round on all your other shows is stupid. It's short term. It's feeding donuts to people who need nutrition. Like, of course you're going to get a 9 rating for serving cake to kids, but you can't serve cake to kids every day. So that's just like pointing to that means, Chris, you're itching to get in on this. So go ahead. You're going to land somewhere in the middle.
God, I can't wait. I hope this new TV deal is $200 million a year, and the discourse can just go away.
It won't be.
It won't go away.
I think we all
It
know
doesn't change the fundamentals of my argument. My argument works in a vacuum. But go ahead, Chris.
I think Wade, your perspective on what good wrestling is and should be was excellent and flawless 40 years ago. But as we get to this point now, it's less relevant. You can still book a good show that way. But I think there is room in today's wrestling for a more varied approach to feuds. Whether we like it or not, every single wrestling company on the planet right now has too many titles. And you can't just have titles as the sole motivation for feuds because they don't mean anything anymore. Todd calls them trinkets, and it's one of my favorite bits of his because that's what they are. They're trinkets right now. Hey, what is the secondary title in AEW? Whatever your answer is, you're wrong because nobody knows. Like you can't call it the TBS title because arguably Okada and Ospreay are higher profile than Jack Perry, so that surely their belt should be higher. Anyway, the point is, what makes good wrestling is subjective, and heel versus face, morality play, titles, pride, I want to be the best. They're all fine motivations, but there are other valid motivations that exist. Having said that, it has been proven time and time again that great wrestling with no storyline basis does not sell product and is not enough to keep a product alive. I've said this on every post show I've been on. If that were the case, Ring of Honor would be the biggest promotion in the world because nobody would have been able to beat it in the early 2000s. But it isn't. It died because they didn't have anything but good wrestling. There's a mix and there's a balance to find. And right now, WWE is closer to that balance than anyone has been in my memory of watching wrestling, which goes back almost as far as yours does, Wade, and yours does, Eric. They found a good balance. AEW had that. And don't get me wrong, they still have some excellent storylines. The most recent extremities accepted, like Hangman and Swerve, very good storyline. Whatever's going on with Moxley had me interested up until the plastic bag. The Tony Storm and Mariah, excellent storyline. They know how to write stories. It's just that they go too far with them. They have no quality control, and they don't know how to edit themselves. They're adding the truffle oil at the end of the dish. And it's
food analogy. Or I did food analogies. You did classy food. I did junk food.
Yeah. Let the record reflect that as much as Wade and I have clashed over the years, I've never said his worldview is 40 years ago and that he's out of date. I would never say that about Wade.
I'm just trying to lower the temperature.
The good part about being on YouTube for our podcast listeners is when I'm yelling at Eric, I am smiling. I mean, it's in good fun, but I'm not sincere when I say that Eric's interpretation of a point I make and his rebuttal is about something I didn't say almost always. And it's dumbfounding for someone as smart as Eric to have in his head something that he thinks I'm saying, and I'm not saying it. And I don't think I could be more clear. But I feel like I make a point, and then Chris, you're looking at it as correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to do what Eric does. In that you're saying, well, you just want something that's boring and old school. And I'm like, no, but what I want is I want the end goal to be championships that these guys are fighting for with a blood feud that feels novel because there aren't 3 of them on one pay-per-view and you forget about the one 4 hours earlier by the time you're done. That's my point it should be efficient. And if you water down by having too many titles or too many death threats or too many attempted murders, people are going to turn it into a joke. You're not getting anything out of it if fans are chanting that is murder. What people are doing is they're laughing at your product because it's so over the top. They've de-invested in it. Is that a word? They disinvested in it. They're not into it anymore the way you want fans into it. You want people to get lost in your world, not be chanting, like wondering what's going to happen next that I've never seen before, that the wrestler sits up from and smiles from. I mean, it makes stuff earlier that people sold on the show ridiculous. And you could say, hey, it's a free-for-all. It's a vaudeville show. It's something for everybody on every show. And it's just one sugar rush after another. My argument is I believe a timeless one, which is try dialing it down and making the things that you do that you want to count stand out and count. You can do everything that you want, short of burning houses down, I would argue, and suffocating people. Just do it in a way where you get the most out of it by not crowding the room with a ton of it. You don't go to a concert to watch two bands play at the same time. And that's kind of what AEW does.
All I'm saying, Wade, is that that's what you want, and that's what you like.
No,
and that's what you think will work, and that's fine. That's your view. You're entitled to it. I'm just saying, not everybody shares that view, or that's not their most important thing.
That's not what I want. It's not what I want. I enjoy the chaos of AEW. I do, but I can't turn off my brain and say, because I'm enjoying this is good for business. My job as a journalist, as an analyst, has always been from the perspective of not what gets me going. Does this seem like it is the approach that's going to lead to the it's what's good. I hate that it got co-opted, but what's best for business? That's my perspective. There's a lot of things I like about wrestling that I think are bad for business, and there's things that are whatever. The other side too. So again, you're projecting onto me a dumbed down approach to my analysis that is not there. There are things that irk me that don't matter, and I have fun pointing them out. And there's things that don't irk me that probably should because they're bad for business, but I'm like, whatever. But when I look at a show like last night and Stephanie's like, oh, I forgot about MJF and Danny Garcia by the end, that's not good. And I mean, it's an anecdote, but it's a symptom of a problem in AEW, which is a lack of efficiency and numbing people to what should matter more. And I think it's a competent common sense idea to say, dialing down some of the stuff so that you keep doing it. You just do less of it in a way where it's ineffective. Chris.
I'm not saying that your worldview is outdated or even that your view of wrestling is outdated. I'm saying that the specific way you're talking about how wrestling needs to be or even should be to be best for business wouldn't work today. It worked back then. But today's attention deficit wrestling viewer cannot watch a show that is solely based around 2 or 3 championships. They will lose interest.
WWE just built the best 2 years of their business around the Bloodline storyline, which moved too slowly for Eric, and it's led to this boom in business in which now, there's to say it doesn't work. It's like WWE in certain things that I'm saying is a model for it. And if AEW took the things they're better at than AEW, a variety of wrestling styles, an international flair, things that people take pride who are AEW fans, and they had the patience and the dedication to actually curate and edit and cultivate the good ideas, put time into what people do who are on TV in the way that the Bloodline storyline. Every week there were 15 hours of work put into a 3-minute segment. Every facial expression counted. If AEW put more work in, the things they do would be more effective.
I think it's a bit of a stretch to compare the booking of one storyline to the booking of an entire promotion, though. There have been times where you have said, promotion, like AEW should spend more time saying, Will Ospreay's backstage now, and he goes, I just saw what happened to Bryan Danielson. I hope he's all right. Anyway, let's talk about my match, which didn't happen with the Bloodline stuff. Like on WWE, the Bloodline was its own storyline, but people outside of it weren't talking about what Roman Reigns was doing unless they were being brought into that universe. AEW as a promotion as a whole has had storylines that, no, they weren't as epic as the Bloodline, but what in the last 30 years of wrestling anywhere has been. You can't. That was a once-in-a-lifetime thing with a whole bunch of factors that came together, and probably one of the best creative minds in the history of wrestling working on it pretty much 24/7. AEW doesn't have Paul Heyman. Nobody has Paul Heyman except WWE. So I don't know that we can make that as a fair comparison. AEW is its own company and is not going to be able to do what WWE does. I think my son and I have this conversation all the time. He is a WWE fan first and foremost, but he does enjoy some of the action that we see in AEW. For him, though, there's not enough meat on the bone. He can't get into just the athletic performance as a whole. He can watch it every now and then, but he can't watch it weekly because it's too much in your face, go, go, go. He needs it he prefers it a little slower, a little more drawn out, a little more logical. Mm-hmm. That's fine. I prefer great matches, which is why I'm such a New Japan fan. I like to see the action, and the storyline is almost secondary to me. So Eric is more on that side of things.
Yeah, I'm
from what I can
on
understand.
I'm on the other side for sure.
Yeah.
I'm more storyline. Yeah.
But I think if you want to book a successful product, you need to be able to toe the line between the two. There needs to be a balance between logical storyline building that makes sense and high octane action.
So, Chris, Keith Birdie in the chat says, I think adhering to logic, structure, and smart booking is a universally good practice, opinion aside. Chris, the idea that people today just can't accept these concepts is not only false, but it's giving up.
I think we've seen that it's true, though, right? Because the Bloodline as a storyline worked because it continuously changed direction. At the end of the day, it was all about Roman gradually losing power, but it was, will they take Sammy? Then it was, will Sammy turn? Then it was, will Jay follow him? Then it's what's going on with Jimmy. Then Solo came in. They constantly changed what the story was about without changing the story.
And they never hot-shotted.
They took their time with it, but there were enough changes to keep people interested. But again, I think that's an exception. I don't think you can compare things to that because it stands so high above everything else.
They achieved it with the Judgment Day. I mean, not at the same level, but I mean, and Paul Heyman is involved in the Judgment Day storyline. Damian Priest is one of his projects. He loves Rhea Ripley. And again, this goes to your point. Not everyone can have Paul Heyman, but can't you look at Paul Heyman's success and say maybe we should learn from him instead of discarding what he's doing as to WWE? I think you can say, I mean, a newspaper might have a great columnist who is the best writer and they sell newspapers. So every other market goes, we don't have him. So let's just put out like big, bold, colorful headlines and swear words instead of actually aspiring to write well and communicate to our readers in an effective way, even if we can't live up to the standards of this, award-winning writer at this other paper. Like you should just you can do the good things that WWE does and also make it your own and have the great matches you're talking about, Chris. Have the international style, have a wider variety of moves and a wider and draw from international styles and historical. You can do all that, but drop it into something that isn't third and fourth grade hotshots and numbing people on a show to moves because you're not selling some of the most dangerous, hard-hitting moves ever, which that cage match, which didn't get the best match votes, by the way, Ospreay Pac did. It's winning the best match polls for a reason, because there was an internal logic and structure to what they did that's reasonable within pro wrestling. That Swerve and Hangman, in order to top an attempt at a plastic bag over head attempted murder, the only way they could top it is putting their bodies actually at risk and grossing people out with a needle and burning a house down to forward an angle that started with a house invasion. That's just, you don't have to go there. Sean, I'm going to throw to you. You've been patiently interjecting every once in a while, but what do you think?
No, I just love the conversation. So going back to Mox really, really fast, and I'll talk about the overall thing of what we're saying. So with Mox, that's what I didn't understand about this, and tell me if there's something I'm missing, right? So you had Mox come back with Marina, which, I mean, they need to do a lot of building with her because she was lost before this thing happened. You had him talking about Darby, and then all of a sudden he just comes back, and I know he's with the BCC, like I get that, but he just comes, didn't say, there's no hint of anything with the BCC at all, and then all of a sudden he just comes in behind and attacks Danielson. It's just like, but I know he better talk about why on Wednesday. He better have a good explanation for what he did, because it makes no sense going into it. He never brought him up, never saw anything with him. He's just talking about Darby, and all of a sudden he just comes by and attacks Danielson. It's like, yes, you're with the BCC, you were with them, but like, why? Like, they have to have a good explanation for that, or else I'm going to be out maybe right there, because that just didn't make any sense going in. And then going back to what you guys were saying, I mean, I think you could just take away some of the things that WWE are doing. And Wade, I loved what you talked about before when you were saying AEW, Tony needed to make it feel like a sports-like thing. That's what he was talking about the entire time. And then he never shows, like you said, he never shows outside the arena. He never shows any of that. And then WWE stole the idea, and now they're doing great stuff with it, and it looks cool. And all the people coming in before the matches, and now AEW, they just go to the ring and they just give you a match and think that everybody's just going to be cool with that, and that's what they want. And one thing I'll say, too, that I did not like about Dynamite, nobody talked about it, I think I brought it up in a chat, is when Ospreay was backstage with the conglomeration, I was like, ugh, I do not like that. I like Mark Briscoe. He's just gotten too goofy for me. That stuff backstage, they got to stop that. I think it's getting way old. And they talk about how WWE, oh, we didn't like that stuff in WWE. They're they're doing the stuff that WWE was doing, and now they're doing it, and it's worse than when WWE was doing it.
Yeah.
It's just stop doing it. Like it's just not good. And Ospreay being around it defines him down to me, even though he's a star. But if he keeps doing that kind of stuff, it's going to make him look like less of a star when he's hanging out with Mark Briscoe and Kyle O'Reilly looking like a doof. It's just going to. So I think. What do you think about Mox? Am I right about that? Did not. It just didn't make sense to me when that happened. I was like, you're talking about Darby, now you're doing this. It makes no sense.
Well, the Mox turn didn't surprise me. It was that the other guys turned. That to me, that was a surprise. And it was. There are shock turns. Usually in wrestling, I think we're used to them telegraphing the turn coming for weeks and weeks and weeks, and either they split up or they don't. This one was a shock turn. Not Moxley wasn't out of nowhere, but the others were. And I think we have to see how it plays out. You do have to build a post pay-per-view Dynamite show, which is not something they've always been great at over the years following pay-per-views. So I think there's your hook to tune into Dynamite. You want to see why Moxley put the bag over his head. You won't be able to see it, but you want to explain why he did it. And that's pretty basic booking and pretty good. And we'll see how it plays out. It's Moxley's involved, so I'm sure it's well thought out. If his past is any indication, and we'll see. I mean, it seems like it's something along the lines of he's sick of all the BS in AEW, and he's there to stomp it out. Now, why Danielson is part of the BS, I don't know, because Danielson is still a serious wrestler. So the
story better be good. I mean, chatting with people behind the scene, just generically about like that, the Moxley thing is like Moxley and Danielson was Moxley's best friend. So what happened? What's going to be the story? Or was this just the shock value of creating social media buzz and everyone's talking about it, so it's a success, which is just such a dumb metric to use. I don't
think John Moxley uses that as his metric. He'd be the one person for sure I can say that about in the company.
Yeah, great point. People will point to it as a success because of ephemeral social media pop. But what matters is a story going to be, Danielson, I have a bad neck and I'm on borrowed time as a full-time wrestler, and now you tried to suffocate me, so now I want a match against you. Like, I mean, there needs to be some foundation for why Moxley turned on him, but it can't be something that makes you go, oh yeah, Danielson's a jerk. We didn't know that. Moxley's got to have a reason that works for him, his decision, but doesn't make you sympathetic to him, which was one of the problems with Hangman Swerve and all its brilliant storytelling. Is you had a guy do a home invasion with standing over a crib with a bunch of implications of horrible things, and then the crowd loved him before and after that storyline, so you sort of had to wriggle around that and then say, well, he's an anti-hero and it's shades of gray. No, he invaded a house and threatened a little toddler baby. You can't just say, well, that's shades of gray and that's sophistication and everything else is so stupid and too simple. Again, that's a straw man argument, false extremes in a binary choice that doesn't exist. It was a problem that they had that they never quite addressed and solved. They think they can get away with it by just upping the ante on yelling and threats and then violence. And yes, I mean, to a degree it worked, but to a degree, as we've illustrated, it wasn't picked for the best match by most people. And the crowd was sort of not sure how to react to it. And we got a cowboy shit chant. And I mean, I don't know. I think it's rather self-evident that there's an overabundance of things that AEW ought to curate and dial down. And everything that they do, they can still do, but in quantities and at a pace that actually is effective.
Can I bring this up real quick, Chris, before you? So that's the thing. Like now with this feud, it's got to be a blood feud because he just tried to kill him. Like it's got to be a blood feud because, and we've already. That's the thing about AEW. I am okay sometimes with blood. It doesn't bother me. But now AEW is going to the other extreme. They're doing it too much. And then again, you just get numb to it after a while. It doesn't, again, Eric, it just doesn't mean anything anymore. When you do blood in all these matches and all this stuff, like I said, that's why I'm with Wade on. It just numbs you to it. There's nowhere to go from that. You can't go anywhere. And now they're going to have Danielson, Moxley in this blood feud because Mox loves to bleed. And Danielson's now starting to love to bleed more and more. And it's like, I don't need that to tell a good story in wrestling. Just tell me a good story. Get me invested in these two people. And now you have the stuff with Mox. People mostly don't want to boo him, but now they have to because he tried to kill someone. So now I have to boo him. How do you come back from that to become a face at some point? Because
And Eric points out, Sean, there's been blood feuds and people take a couple of weeks off or a month on, and they come back and we have accepted that as wrestling fans. I don't know. And again, you can point to Randy Orton and the Fiend, but like, how often does it get to this level? Like, I just think we've gone beyond a point where it makes any sense that they should coexist, and I just don't think wrestling needs to go there to sell tickets. I would argue, even if it helps sell tickets, you can sell just as many tickets with a little more finesse, and then you don't end up with a long-term issue as a result, which is no one takes anything seriously. I mean, there's just nothing believable about the structure when you go to those places, which is why they always could have, and a lot of very successful promoters chose not to. Memphis didn't, what was it yesterday when we started the show? Memphis did not do a car crash angle because they were selling out buildings. I mean, it's like when things are slipping, you get desperate and you start, doing the equivalent of yelling booking, just yelling. We're just going to yell out our angles and yell out our hot shot angles. And it's like, I think that's the wrong reaction to this. Anyway. Chris, you want to?
Chris, you got something on this. Come on, Chris.
Yeah. So, I'm going to agree with Eric for the most part. When you have something like this happen on a pay-per-view, you have to give it at least until the next TV show to get the motivation. He's not going to cut a promo that night to say why he did it. Perfectly fine.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
I'm worried that the motivation is going to be, it's time for you to go home. You're not going to do it on your own, so I'm going to help you along. And he's trying to get Danielson to realize it's time to retire, and he's doing it for his own good, which is that, okay, so we should be cheering you, problem that we had when it was Swerve and Danielson. I also feel like he's going to ask Darby to step aside, ask Darby to step aside. That was the air quotes, by the way, for the podcast listeners later, so that Moxley can have the match. But I don't see Moxley beating Danielson because I don't think backstage Moxley would want to do that. I normally trust Moxley's judgment, but then there was a plastic bag, so my trust has been damaged. And there's been a lot of talk about Memphis wrestling, but in the era of Memphis wrestling, I know this wasn't from Memphis, but I could easily see Jerry Lawler booking it. Akeem the African Dream was a thing around the same time, and nobody is asking for that to come back. Yeah. So I don't think we can use that as justification for what's happening today. Danielson and the BCC, that split, like Eric said, that the shock wasn't the Moxley turn. Everybody saw that coming. I was wondering how he was going to avoid the beatdown from the rest of the BCC. And then the fact that Yuta was the odd person out was also kind of surprising because he's the one that everybody is okay hating.
That's fair. Yeah.
This is the way to get someone to boo Moxley, which has always been the issue. People can boo Claudio. People are willing to boo Yuta, but Moxley and Danielson, you just can't hate them. This will do it.
Will it, or is it so extreme people just kind of check out? Like, I'm curious. I mean, it's a genuine question. I don't know because we haven't really seen AEW go to this.
It's as much the victim as it is the act. There's nobody who, like, the only person that they love more than Moxley is Danielson. So Danielson and Orange Cassidy and Will Ospreay are the three people you can attack and get booed. So you have to expect that maybe Danielson is going to find some friends. Obviously, Yuta's on his side, but who knows where that goes. I'm intrigued. I wish they had got to it a different way, but I'm willing to see what the follow-up is. And if we put aside the attempted murder, if that had just been a beatdown or something else, I think we would all be talking about what a great surprise it was. And that's hard to do in wrestling right now.
And surprise isn't the goal. Just a satisfying payoff is the goal. Sometimes you should see something coming or suspect something is coming, but you still are thoroughly engrossed when it does. And bookers who think their goal is to fool wrestling fans because that's what old school promoters got to do in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and they miss that. They miss fooling the marks. You can lose sight of the fact that you're not going to fool people. The idea is engage people, tell a story where they want to be there for what they think will be the outcome, and on occasion there's a twist or something that they don't expect. Linda Butler in the chat said Randy versus a Fiend. Oops, I clicked wrong here. Randy versus a Fiend was the last time I thought a feud was so stupidly over the top I stopped watching. Alexa tried to murder Randy with a lighting rig. You know, I don't know what the result of everything that they did is going to be, and it might pop a rating, but I don't think this is a sustainable, approach to take. Obviously, I think that, and I don't think they need to work this hard to please the people they're trying to please. I think they can please the people they're trying to please and also not turn off the people they're turning off. And that's what I'm calling for. I'm not trying for them to be different, just a curated version of what they do well that differentiates them. And I don't particularly think that's controversial or going back in time to something that doesn't work anymore. I think it's sort of self-evidently, obviously, the right thing to do. And I'm always shocked by any pushback to it, but maybe it's my communication skills.
I do want to say, I forgot to mention, I take your point, Eric, that blood feuds have been done and recovered from. But we have a recent example of one that just dragged on with the Rey Mysterio having his eye gouged out, and how long the Rey versus Seth feud dragged out after Rey came back. Because how do you walk away from that? So I've seen it go both ways in recent history, and I don't know that this is going to be different. I hope I'm wrong.
And I didn't like that either. I don't think.
No.
It's like just, again, it's like he did that, and it was not an angle where I'm like, oh yeah, that'll help business, and that's a smart thing to do. It doesn't work in pro wrestling. You can do it in a horror movie. You can do it in Saw. You can do it in, there's plenty of genres where it works, but in pro wrestling, it's a sign of desperation and a lack of discipline. Sean, anything else quick you want to do? Because I do, for everybody's sake, want to wrap up here pretty quick.
Yeah, we're at 3 hours here.
I can't host Wrestling Night in America every week. It's not late enough. We're not tired yet. Well, I should speak for myself.
So, just real quick, I'll say, I just think we all fun about this about both companies is both companies have flaws that we talk about, and I think that's what we're here for, is to talk about them. Whether we like, I might like one company over the other. But I think, me personally, Wade, I'm very fair about both. I think WWE has things I don't like. AEW has things I don't like. I think we should talk about them and be honest about them. And like you said, is it? I don't want to say that phrase that you use, Wade. I'm not using that phrase. But is it good enough where it's going to get people watching and going to get ratings and people, and right now, I just think AEW has flaws they need to get better at, or else it's going to stay where it is. And that's unfortunate, because I want them to do better. And so, Chris, Eric, I appreciate all of you guys. Wade, you're here for a reason, man. I appreciate all you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Sean. Great contribution here. I'll say this, and then I want to read our super chats and a couple chat things, and we'll sign off. And if any of you have to go. I know we're running late. All right, cool. Chris is shaking his head. No, he doesn't have to go. Eric, I know you've got things, so you text me or let me know. So I just want to say this: if I wasn't doing this job, and I had to choose most weeks to watch just one wrestling show, I don't know which one I'd watch. Honestly, like it month to month it changes. Right now, it probably wouldn't be SmackDown, but because it's not grabbing me the last handful of weeks.
But historically, in recent years, probably SmackDown, right?
Maybe. Like, again, I think sometimes there's a mistake.
Through the bloodline story, I guess.
I think sometimes there's a mistake in interpreting my analysis, my critiques, my commentary, that praising something means it's what I would, praising something that's working or doing something that is being done well in a way that it hadn't been done before, and me praising it is me saying that's the show that I most look forward to watching. There's something, like when I just think about my mood going into Monday, Wednesday, and Friday in particular, there's not a big difference in terms of, I'm going to sit down and watch 2, or in case of Raw, 3 hours. I am excited about one and dread another. Like I look for, I say this often, and maybe I should say it more often. I really look forward to covering Dynamite, like warts and all. I really look forward to covering Raw, warts and all. I enjoy covering AEW Dynamite at its quote worst more than Raw at its worst, because AEW Dynamite is making exciting mistakes and Raw is making boring mistakes. So when it's been off kilter, Raw's been like really good lately. 3 hours have been flowing by. They've got characters that I think people are really invested in. And again, sometimes the booking pattern, there's slow periods because they're trying to fill time to get to the next pay-per-view, and it's just calendar, an inconvenience of calendar. But I really I see positives in all 3 of the major cable shows, and each one kind of overtakes the other every few weeks, every few months, in terms of what I personally look forward and enjoy watching while I'm watching more. I just want to throw that out there. I'm not like a a super fan defender of one and a hater of the other. I'm not. It's just 100% honest lie detector connected to me. That's how I feel about all this. I
think
enjoy
that's important to say, because in wide swaths of the internet and online and in the podcasting world, there's a lot of money to be made in praising WWE, or more specifically, dumping all over AEW. Plenty of people do that as a grift. I've never once thought that that's what you were doing, right? You have your criticisms. You had your criticisms of WWE when Vince McMahon was running it. It was so bad for so many years. I'm sure your job was fairly tedious and torturous for you.
Yeah.
I don't think that's what you're doing at all. I think you're applying what you value in wrestling, what you like, what you think will be successful, and what has been historically successful, and providing your analysis. I don't think you are well, I can't mention any of the people. Grift. I don't think you are doing the anti-AEW, pro-WWE grift that so many are doing out there.
And I'll just add, it's not only that I appreciate the comments, Eric, and it's not that I'm not only being you're framing, and I hope I strive to be fair and even had in my analysis and criticism. I'm revealing something I don't talk about a lot, and I don't think is all that important to the job that I do here on my podcast and YouTube show, which is just saying I enjoy all the shows pretty close to equally, and they vary depending on the quality of the product during that stretch of time. And during that time, I just try to criticize what I think is critical and praise what I think is praiseworthy. But I could do that and still have by far a favorite brand. And I think I could pull that off. I'm just revealing I don't. That's all I'm saying.
I think
Chris?
there's a lot of weight to be carried by opinions of respected voices in the community like yours. There's a certain competitor of yours who has made a huge name for himself just by putting his opinion on every match, to the point where a few days after every pay-per-view, people are waiting with bated breath to see how ridiculously out to lunch those star ratings are. Your opinion carries a lot of weight, and the fact that you don't often share it makes it even more valuable, I think. I've not learned to separate my opinion when I review shows, and I think it adds a little bit of color to what I do with my style of coverage, which is not for everyone. If you want to check it out, you can check out my New Japan reports on pwtorch right now.
We have a menu. Go to Japan coverage, and it's there.
Yeah, just don't worry about that Sean Radican guy, though.
Oh God, Javier. We got so many. Yeah.
But I think there's weight to it. I think there's value in
Kelly Wells
opinions. He used to be a completist. I've lost all respect there.
Yeah. Enough inside baseball. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's value to opinions in wrestling coverage, as long as it doesn't color the analysis. Like you've done what you just said there. I like all shows equally, but I will criticize all shows equally. That's the way to go, in my opinion. So. And there are times where I probably liked one company more than the other in my decades of covering wrestling, but right now and just lately that has not been the case. I mean, I think they're all doing the product they're putting out there in very different ways is relatively equally entertaining for me, but I don't find that to be essential to me being fair. I'm just revealing that happens to be the case right now. I don't find myself thinking, oh, it's Friday, crap, or it's Wednesday, yay, or it's Wednesday, crap, it's Monday, yay. I'm just, I'm pretty evenly enjoying all the products. Okay, I want to start with super chats here. Normally I try to get to them right away. Sorry, I didn't. Let's see. Jordan Saylor, thank you for a big contribution. Sorry, it took us 2.5 hours to get to it. I hope they explain why BCC went against Danielson so brutally. Honestly, of all the things we're talking about, that's like, would you guys disagree with me? Is that the most important thing that AEW does? Because the Swerve and Hangman, it's over for now, probably. Mm-hmm. Garcia and MJF was an opening match. The women had their street fight. It exceeded expectations, but it's not main event. The most important thing coming out of All Out is the explanation for what they did to Danielson.
For sure, it's the new top program, as far as I can tell, assuming.
Yep.
The bit of an assumption for AEW, the ensemble promotion, but usually who your world champion is facing next is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been going back and forth on whether I thought Danielson should open the show or Moxley, but it has to be Moxley because Danielson should not be on the show. He needs to sell that. And Moxley needs to open the show. He needs to come out. He needs to give his reasoning, and then he needs to leave. Don't talk about you fans or you people did this. Just say, this is why I attacked you. This is what's coming next, and then leave. And that needs to be brought up multiple times throughout the 2 hours.
And they've got 5 weeks before the next pay-per-view on October 12th. So they got plenty of time to let it breathe, I think.
And Grand Slam around the corner.
No pun intended on the let it breathe thing.
Nicely played. All right. Jordan Sadler also said, the plastic bag and the needle was too much for me. I think people will still cheer for Mox. Prediction on that front. I think you could argue, and I might argue, that was so over the top. It's outside the realm of the normal way people watch wrestling, and they're going to largely disregard it if Moxley is cool. In the same way they cheered Swerve after the home invasion, in the same way they were chanting cowboy shit after he burned down Swerve's family home. I just think when you go outside the realm of what works in pro wrestling, people disregard it and they cheer for who's more cool.
I think Mox has such a reservoir of goodwill built up that it's going to be hard to get people to boo him.
Yeah, and maybe this angle went where it went because of that, and maybe stop fighting it. Even like Danielson was a heel because it was more fun. It's like, you know what? Your job isn't that fun. Your job, I mean, maybe Tony told him on that when he's deciding where to go. But Danielson's job is to give the fans what they want. And cheering him is more productive than him fighting the tide of that to be a heel.
So when MJF gets cheered, even though he wants to be booed, he'll go for the lowest common denominator. You know, insult the local sports team, call the people scumbags of the town or whatever, to say it's a dump. Mox, that's not really who he is or what his character has ever been. So he can't really do that. So what does he do to get people to boo him? I mean, to your point, Wade, he puts a plastic bag on a beloved babyface's head.
He could show up with a gas mask again and start talking about how dirty the fans are. I mean, you could always go that route.
They make it tough. They make it tougher on themselves than they need to. And we're circling back to kind of my broad point. Sean also with a super chat, who's just joined us on the show. Where does Swerve go now? He got his house burned down, then loses, and has lost twice in a row. I don't like it. Where does he go now? We largely covered that when Sean was on. A couple other things. Derek Hubbard said, overall, I enjoyed All Out and thought it was quite good. Unfortunately, AEW continues to be a victim of their own excesses, too much, too far, too often.
The cage match rating has plummeted from 9.24 to 9.23. So I think Derek is right.
And people still love donuts, but it's not a good way to fuel yourself. It's not a sustainable way to fuel yourself.
I mean, I didn't like the bag on the head or the chair shot to the head either in the last 2 matches, and I deducted like 1.5 points for that for the show overall. So
I deducted. I deducted from that too. But A Milano 20. Honestly, of all the matches last night, I was most put off by the plastic bag over Brian's head. I'm going to rapid fire these. Interrupt me if you want to jump in. I'm very close to making the decision to no longer watch AEW after last night. I'm disgusted by the suffocation angle, the needle, and the chair shot. Listening to your coverage helps me make that call. Steve Repsher says, we've seen that Tony Khan has little grasp of the slow build and long-term storytelling. Hence, the last thing we need from him is more pay-per-views. King of Strong Style. Someone answer me this. They did all the crazy stuff. Did he get one new fan? Who is more over after this show? Chris?
No, it didn't. And that's the issue. I don't think anything they've done has gained fans. And if it has, it's losing more than it looks like it's losing. So that's not good either.
We'll see if the 18 to 34 male demo bounces back in the coming weeks. I suspect not, just because the promotion is cold relative to the number one in the marketplace, but we'll see.
I think every demo will watch a good product, and when you start trying to guess what a slice of your audience wants and hyper focus on that, you're losing. You're just keep the plane in the air with low turbulence, and everybody on the plane will be happy.
And it may not have anything to do with that, because again, Tony Khan probably not telling the wrestlers you're going to put a bag over his head. That's the wrestlers coming to Tony Khan.
Yeah.
I mean, they did have those Costco guys on the pre-show, whatever the heck that was all about. I mean, I think I'm about 30 years too old to understand any of that. But if that's what it's going to take to get the 18 to 35, maybe they should try something else.
Timothy Marone says in the chat, the only issue I had with the plastic bag spot was, what was the point? The spot was meant to kill someone? Was that Mox's intention? So I think Mox has to say, right, I wanted to put the fear of death in you, of course. And he should say, of course, I wasn't going to let you die. I know how long humans can survive without oxygen. I want to scare you. I want, and then go on from there. I'm not going to write Moxley's promo, but that should be right. The fundamental premise is I didn't stop short of killing you and I wanted to. That's crazy. That's crazy than anything else they've done. He has to say it was to scare you, right?
Yeah.
Sean in the chat said Mox could have just beaten Danielson down without the plastic bag easy. He better have a good explanation. The Shermanator says the only thing overused on the show. Oh, I already covered that. Sorry. The women's street fight, shaking my head. They did millions of things, didn't sell much of it for a few that no one cares about. We praised that match a bit. Eric, what do you think of that women's street fight?
I mean, it was a lot better than I thought it would be. But weirdly, AEW women's street fights always deliver. Almost always. It's so bizarre.
Yeah.
Even with Sky Blue, yeah. And I think, especially for me, this one stood out because those two have not had good chemistry in their previous matches. They should. It looks like it should be a good match on paper, but they just have not gelled together in the ring. And this was their best showing against each other so far.
Brian Turner's VHS Rehab says Tony does not have anyone tell the boy, don't say boys and girls, the wrestlers flat out no. Workers will run over a promoter. Wrestlers can call each other the boys and the girls, but no one outside the business should ever use those terms. What, Eric?
That was hilarious. Legitimately.
Do you think you have the right to call them the boys?
No, I'm agreeing with you. I thought that was very funny. Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. I thought you were laughing at sometimes you laugh at things that I think are self-evidently like the right thing. So I thought you were laughing at me point.
Well, it is also 3 hours and 15 minutes. So maybe I'll be delirious at this point. Not Hunter Johnston, the booker.
I was just going to
delirious.
say.
Yep. King of Strong Style and what is said by next week. By the way, the reason I say it sounds like you're trying to put yourself in the clubhouse, like when you use those terms, and it's terms for like under 18-year-old people. Those are by definition. It's just like, they're words have meaning, and if you're not in the clubhouse, don't call them that. And it has a history of promoters taking advantage of wrestlers by referring to them as the boys because boys will be boys. They're not actually adults who need to be treated that way. They're the crazy people, and we're the smart ones who will pay them what we think they deserve. So there's a whole history to that also. King of Strong Style, and what is said by next week, all this will be forgotten. People just move on. It doesn't even last or help business. That's the crazy part. It won't help draw. I put this up on the screen earlier, but for podcast listeners, Lady B said, last night's show proved to me I'm not a sicko, and honestly, I'm okay with that. King of Strong Style, AEW is the only company whose metrics are down year to year in everything, yet wrestling media still calls everything they do great. It's ridiculous. Well, not everybody. That's a broad generalization. Chris?
I also don't think that's a fair comment. Dynamite has been improving recently. The problem is they've got weeks and weeks of bad TV to make up for. A good show on a Wednesday is not going to start drawing ratings that same day. It needs some buzz around it to make people watch the next week or a few weeks down the line.
Yeah.
So it's going to take a while for that to catch up.
There's a time to hotshot, and that term gets used broadly in a lot of ways. But in general, there's a time to hotshot when you have a belief in your product and that you bring people in for something, but you think the other hour and 45 minutes in a tour show is going to go, oh, I want to be here for all 2 hours every week. So if you hotshot because you think that's going to sustain ratings, that's unlikely to work. When you're confident you're hitting your stride, but not enough people are watching you, then you shock the system a little bit, get people in. There's a time and place for it.
I mean, as somebody who lived through the Monday Night Wars, I know what hot-shotting on a week-to-week basis looks like. This isn't it.
No.
We'll know.
Yeah. It's like building a fire, right? And here's your second Survivor reference of the night. When they go the fire building challenge, you can't just put all your coconut husk on and light it and hope it's going to burn through. It's going to burn out. You need to build underneath that and get a steady fire going. The CM Punk debut is a perfect example, and Wade, you talked about that a lot. They had CM Punk on, huge audience, incredible crowd. I have huge regrets for not buying a plane ticket. I could have gone to that show. And the next thing they put on was just some meaningless match that could have been a Mr. Potato Head plug and play mid-card. They did not capitalize on that whatsoever.
Yeah. And it was Happy Punk. I mean, I wasn't like, oh, I'm happy now. Okay, good. Well, glad to hear that. I'll go back to what I used to watch on Wednesday nights. I mean, obviously, it popped a big number that they never got again for Rampage. But, I mean, yeah, in multiple ways. They hot-shotted and they got a rating out of it, but they didn't really have an eye on sustaining it. Randall using the needle is even further over the line. It screams of desperation that they have to do the most to try to get a reaction. The bigger problem is they're getting diminishing returns. King of Strong Style, bro, doing indie style matches for 5 hours with kick out after kick out, move after move isn't great show. That's the problem with y'all. There's more to wrestling than that style of matches. Eric, are there too many kickouts of big moves in pro wrestling? I know you don't watch a lot of WWE, but this is a thing that predates AEW. It started to be a thing. And I don't think you want every finish protected where no one ever kicks out. But where are you philosophy and style-wise on what in particular AEW is doing in that regard?
King of Strong Style must have really hated when Paul Levesque was booking NXT, because that's all that was, the Johnny Garganos of the world, absolutely. And the shocked faces, right?
Yep.
I'm fine with it. If it's good workers in the ring doing it and they're helping build a match and you feel really invested, that's great. If it's like two sort of middling mid-carders doing it, maybe not. Maybe not as much.
Randall says, I was 5 in 1989 when I saw the Funk bag ankle at the Clash. He did enough for people to get the point. The Mox clip was over the line, in my opinion. They made it as graphic as possible, and it was just too much. So let's answer that. Chris, is there a way to do a suffocation plastic bag angle that doesn't cross a line and that Moxley went like? I mean, your facial expression sort of says no, but Moxley could have put the bag over Danielson's head for 5 seconds and then pulled it off and held it in front of him as a way to say, I could have, but I didn't. But we got something to talk about, or whatever. I mean,
I think if you'd said to me 2 days ago that you were going to ask me that question and it wasn't a hypothetical, I would have just believed it. Yeah. No, just don't do it. Just why? What? Just don't do it. I don't want to see it. Even if you could have done something hypothetically, just don't. Just don't.
The way out of that was to have Wheeler get out from behind Pac or whoever was holding him, and then after however many seconds, right?
Yeah. Then we wouldn't know how long Moxley would have held it, and it would be up to our imagination.
And then you have Wheeler get beaten down as well, and then they're both lying there. Sure.
And then you're feeding him oxygen, right? I mean, which Danielson probably loved because he loves playing dead. It's like his big thing. So
yes. BGF says, maybe I just like the Sugar Rush. I'm not normally a big fan of ultraviolence, but I loved all the crazy stuff last night. I was just entertained. But obviously, they can't do that every pay-per-view. Not every pay-per-view. Not to that degree. Andrew Lansdell, I'm confused about how we went from Where the Best Wrestle to a pay-per-view filled with the wrestling equivalent of shock humor.
Excellent insight from someone who is clearly not related to me in any way, shape, or form.
Mark Paschetti says, when Tony doesn't have a new TV deal yet, his decision-making last night was completely tone deaf. This is a result of a booker who doesn't know how to tell stories. So Tony might be trying to hotshot in the midst of TV ratings. I mean, look what WWE did with NXT. They sent Becky Lynch. That's right. They sent all these big stars over to NXT, built up ratings. They signed the CW deal, and then, they signed their deal, happened to CW, and then I'll send it back to the regular crew with NXT. Is this Tony's way of trying to hotshot a TV rating by doing this on pay-per-view, getting us to do a 3.5-hour show on a Sunday night talking about primarily that and social media and all that? He thinks this might help him get a better TV deal. Could he be right? Chris?
No, I don't think he's right.
Nope.
That's the simple question. It's the simple answer.
Eric?
No, go ahead, Eric. I have nothing to add to my note.
So one of two things are true here. Tony Khan is the biggest idiot ever in the history of pro wrestling by bragging about how he's got this TV deal done, 90% done, whatever, and it's going to slip through his fingers and he's going to have a whole carton of egg on his face. Or this thing is largely done, it is already done, and he's just waiting. He's just jerking everybody's chain because he wants to make his announcement on his own terms at his own time. And that would be my guess as to what's going on.
I'm surprised nobody has brought up the NWA deal and James Mitchell and what happened with that and how that went up in smoke because of one promo that was filmed. There's the potential for that here too, right? The deal could be 99% done and it could just go up in flames because of this. So
the Eric Koulis angle in ECW and Paul Heyman not handling that well in terms of informing his partners and giving them a heads up about it. Claimed he did, so that's why I asked them about it, and it turned out they didn't. I took Paul had his word and wanted comment, and it was news to them. And then Paul actually had to catch them up on what he was saying he had already done, and they lost their pay-per-view distribution for a while. It was a setback. So yeah, this stuff happens, and WWE they push back on a lot of bad media coverage because it can be bad. I think in this current landscape, that's less likely to happen. I think TBS and TNT are more desperate than they are picky, but we'll see. Let's see. Brian Turner's VHS Rehab. I was okay watching a damn snake bite Savage, but not some of the crap they put on last night. Gibbs said, I think the reason why they do a cinder block spot is because they do so many other spots in AEW that do not get sold. Yeah, I mean, what you can't hit someone with a cane and expect anyone to care, or if you do that, if you keep raising the stakes like that. Brian Turner said, we used to call that garbage wrestling. Now it's normal wrestling. I don't know. Derek Hubbard says, once upon a time, I did hardcore and even death matches. I did tacks, barbed wire, light tubes, staple guns, the works. I grew out of it and realized it was masochistic. I matured, or at least wised up. Fastian Bargain said, here's some positive. Looking at the past plastic bag attempted murder going forward from that, mock stuff can be good, and the wrestling and story with Danielson will be good. Mark Pischetti says, Tony's endangering his wrestlers because they don't know how to book. Let's see. Steve Rep Sure says 5 years ago, WWE was frustrating to watch, and AEW was a welcome alternative. Now it's just about flipped. We're almost done here. Fastian Bargain said, yeah, the chanting, this is murder, was mocking the angle. Not good. That says a lot of what is happening with it. That says a lot of what is happening with this booking at this point. Do you agree that was mocking it? Or is it just being playful about something they're not taking seriously, but not mocking? Like, we're enjoying it, but you don't expect us to take this seriously. So we're being playful instead of giving you, the motions maybe they were actually going for.
I mean, wrestling crowds for the last, 10, 15 years, they love getting themselves over, right? I mean, you even in WWE in France, I'm told that they were chanting and singing the whole time, but it didn't often have anything to do with what was in the match. It's just
that's sort of a European thing, but yeah.
Yeah, they just like going into business for themselves and getting themselves over.
I think in some cities it would be that they were enjoying it, but Chicago's a smart city. It's up there with like Toronto and Philadelphia, that they want to get themselves over. And AEW fans in those cities, triply so. So I think it's almost a guarantee that there was a mocking tone to that in my mind.
Lady B says, I watched with a group of friends. They lost us at attempted murder, and it reiterated by some of the moms in our group, don't let their kids watch AEW. I don't think Tony Khan's going for a kids audience. And I don't know what parents are letting their kids watch AEW to begin with. But yeah, if they were, this could be the show where they lose them. Brian Turner says the show last night was total hot shot. King of Strong Style. The problem with AEW is they claim to be the second biggest promotion, and they want to be major, but they do indie BS like this. I don't get it. Fastian Bargain said, the more I think about the show, it's becoming one of my most hated AEW shows ever. It has to be the worst show they've ever done for me. This was all just crazy. Nothing, all caps, made sense. John, plain old John, says, I'm 36. I started watching WCW in the mid-90s, switched to Attitude Era in 98. You weren't alone. I stopped watching in 2001. You weren't alone. And got back into it with indie wrestling and NXT Black and Gold. You were not alone. I really enjoyed All Out. And Mr. Stevestain? I don't know. If TK isn't clearing the stuff with his broadcast and advertising partners, he's not very intelligent, especially with the renewal deal being stalled for so long. Well, maybe it's not stalled. Maybe it's done, and they're just, as Eric says, waiting for their time. All right, that is the end of the comments that I wanted to throw onto the show. The ones that I had starred. Anything else, Chris, you want to add before we sign off?
No. I'm glad we got a taste of Okada Takeshita. I'm looking forward to seeing that as a singles feud at some point.
Yes.
That's really the only thing that we didn't actually touch on. I mean, this was probably the best of Okada that we've seen, because yes, it was a four-way, but he kind of handled everyone except Takeshita. And I'm excited to see that match, as I think a lot of Japanese wrestling aficionados will be, because there's some political leanings to that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. So that's at the top of my list of exciting takeaways.
Eric, how about you?
Yeah, frothing at the mouth for Takeshita and Okada. Like, Like, it is second behind you'll be surprised that I'm saying this, but Cody versus The Rock is the match I most want to see in wrestling. I loved the angle where The Rock just beat the hell out of Cody before Mania, and I can't wait for that match. And number 2 might be Takeshita Okada. And I will say this about this is my first time on a show with Chris. He has a very much of a charisma going on there. It's like he does entertainment for a living or something. Very reminiscent of, have you watched the FX show What We Do in the Shadows? Either of you? Yeah.
I have not.
Chris reminds me very much of Matt Berry on that show, who plays Laszlo, the charismatic guy. So, which I mean is high praise, and I think Chris probably knows that. I could tell. Wade, I gave you high praise earlier by calling you not a grifter, which you may not think is high praise, but for me is super high praise. Right? I'm vouching for your journalistic approach to wrestling analysis as opposed to the hacks out there.
Awesome. All right. Time for a plug. Our Wade Keller post show is available following Raw, Dynamite, and SmackDown. We don't go this long, but it is not all dissimilar to this conversation. So subscribe if you want to listen to it. Search Wade Keller in your podcast app to subscribe. While you're at it, subscribe to the Blue Logo Show. That includes our weekly flagship and a bunch of other cool stuff. Interviews with XW creative team writers, big names. We just put up a Steve Austin interview that I did from 10 years ago that is timeless and amazing. I think Steve Austin and Jim Ross are the two people who we just are in sync the most in terms of philosophy on wrestling, in terms of podcast conversations. So those stand out to me. And also search pwtorch and subscribe to the pwtorch Daily Cast, which is part of what this show is going to be dropped on that feed. And it includes the pwtorch 90s Past Cast, among other specific shows on the feed, usually a new show every day of the week. Patrick Moynihan and Alex McDonald do a great job running through a 30 years ago Pro Wrestling Torch newsletter back issue. You can get all those shows ad-free and a ton of bonus content, a ton of VIP exclusive content. It's not bonus content. It's the main stuff we do. Everything with Rich and Wade, the post pay-per-view roundtables, like the 2-hour one nearly that we did last night following All Out. So if you didn't get enough All Out talk, you can get our instant conversation there with Todd Martin and Javier Machado. And then access to our archives dating back 35 plus years by becoming a VIP member. pwtorch.com/govip is the way to go to become a VIP member. That gives you details on Patreon, signing up with your Apple account, or signing up on our main page. We'll leave that on the screen as we sign off here. Again, pwtorch.com/govip. If you like our brand of coverage and commentary, if you've lasted 3.5 hours, you probably do. And if we haven't worn you out too much, this is a big dose of what we try to provide for you throughout the week, every week, and have for decades. So check us out, support us. We're a small business that are dependent upon customers who pay for our membership, and we work hard to give you a lot in return for that. So thank you to our members, and please become one. pwtorch.com/govip. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. It was good to get your take on AEW, and we'll figure out a way to talk AEW again soon.
Thanks for having me.
And Chris, thank you so much for doing this. I know you had a lot in your mind. We started off agreeing, and then it seemed to just get off course.
My pleasure. This was a bucket list item for me as well. So yeah, I've enjoyed this a lot.
And it's fun filling in for Greg Parks. Again, the future of the show, if you didn't listen to the beginning or catch us, we're going to try to keep Wrestling Night in America live, even without Greg, with a variety of formats. We're still working through it. There's just a lot of different things going on, and we're still trying to solidify everything. But keep Wrestling Night in America in your plans until further notice. Thanks, everybody, and we will talk to you next time.